In the dim corridors of time, where empires rose and crumbled, and monarchies trembled under the weight of modernity, one queen stood as an enduring pillar of discipline, duty, and sheer unbreakable resolve. She was not born to be a symbol. She was not raised to become a sovereign. And yet, through the relentless tides of history, she emerged as one of the most quietly powerful figures of the 20th century. A queen who witnessed the ruins of old Europe, the flames of 2 world wars, and the transformation of the British monarchy into the institution the modern world would inherit. Her name was Mary of Teck. To most, she appeared rigid, stoic, bound by the formality of a fading Victorian age. But beneath the diamonds, the posture, and the immaculate self-control, Mary carried scars of personal loss, political upheaval, and a world that changed faster than any royal house could prepare for. She endured the death of children, the collapse of dynasties she loved, and the violent fall of empires she had grown up alongside. And yet, through it all, she continued, tirelessly, to preserve the monarchy she believed was not merely a family inheritance, but a sacred charge. She was a Queen Consort who became the matriarch of kings, a princess whose engagement to one prince turned into marriage with his brother, a mother who saw her firstborn son abdicate the throne for love, a scandal that nearly shattered the monarchy she had spent a lifetime strengthening, and a grandmother who guided the future Queen Elizabeth II through the unsteady path toward her destiny. This is the story of Mary of Teck, the queen who survived 2 world wars, the slow death of the Victorian world, and the birth of a new age. A queen whose influence was felt not through speeches or displays of passion, but through the quiet, uncompromising certainty of duty. Mary of Teck was born into a world that balanced between majesty and modesty, a peculiar and formative contradiction that influenced every detail of her early life and shaped the woman who would one day stand at the heart of the British monarchy during its most turbulent century. She entered the world as Victoria Mary Augusta Louise Olga Pauline Claudine Agnes on May 26, 1867, in Kensington Palace, a place touched with the echoes of past monarchs, yet worn with the frayed edges of a family struggling under the weight of expectation and financial strain. Her parents, Prince Francis, Duke of Teck, and Princess Mary Adelaide, were royals of impeccable pedigree, but limited wealth. Her mother descended from King George III, and her father came from the German house of Württemberg. Their noble titles were impressive, but their bank accounts told another story. They were royal, but not rich, aristocratic, but not secure. And so, Mary, affectionately called May by her family, spent her childhood in an atmosphere both privileged and precarious. This duality became her earliest teacher. She grew up surrounded by formality, palace walls, and royal etiquette, yet she learned frugality, not by choice, but by necessity. Her family frequently packed up their belongings and moved abroad to escape mounting debts, living for long stretches in Florence, Germany, and smaller houses scattered across Britain. These experiences instilled in her a sense of adaptability, but also a quiet discipline that would follow her throughout her life. While other royal children played in ornate rooms filled with gilded toys and waited upon by servants, Mary learned to live with fewer luxuries, fewer indulgences, and a greater understanding that duty must always outweigh desire. Her mother was warm, generous, and well-loved in social circles, but she was also emotional, impulsive, and loud. Her father was kind, but often impractical, more comfortable charming an audience than managing finances. Mary, the eldest child, became the steady center of a household caught in the perpetual tension between social expectation and financial limitation. She learned early that emotions should be controlled, never displayed, that gratitude should be quiet, not showy, and that a royal life, even one lived modestly, required impeccable discipline. The emotional restraint that later defined her public persona was not a performance. It was a survival mechanism learned in childhood. She was exceptionally intelligent, curious, and observant. Her teachers noted her sharp memory and her appetite for learning. She devoured history books, studied languages, and developed a polished, almost regal sense of self-control long before she ever entered the public sphere. She was quiet, but not timid, reserved, but never dull. Beneath her calm exterior lived a powerful intellect and a deeply empathetic understanding of human nature, an understanding that would allow her to navigate some of the most complex crises in modern monarchy. Her upbringing also placed her at a unique vantage point between worlds. She was close enough to royalty to understand its responsibilities, yet distant enough to grasp how fragile reputation could be. She saw how easily fortune could crumble, how swiftly public opinion could shift, and how necessary it was for a royal to embody stability even when nothing around them was stable at all. All these lessons quietly prepared her for a life she could not yet imagine. As Mary entered her late teens and early 20s, her poised nature and impeccable reputation made her a compelling prospect for marriage. Yet she remained unmarried far longer than many expected. In royal circles, an unmarried princess was a ticking clock. Whispers circulated. Her mother fretted. Suitors appeared and disappeared. But Mary's own temperament, steady, patient, unwilling to rush, made her wait seem almost dignified. She believed that marriage was not a matter of convenience, but destiny. And destiny, though delayed, eventually appeared. Prince Albert Victor, the eldest son of the Prince of Wales and heir to the British throne after his father, was encouraged to meet Mary. Known as Eddie, he was handsome, charming, and well-liked, but he was also fragile, unfocused, and lacking in discipline. The royal family believed Mary's steadiness could balance his weaknesses. Their engagement in 1891 was met with optimism. Mary approached it with sincerity, ready to embrace the duty of a future Queen Consort. She grew fond of Eddie, admiring his gentleness even as she recognized his limitations. A future with him felt uncertain, but she was committed. Then tragedy struck. In January 1892, Eddie died suddenly of pneumonia during an influenza outbreak. Mary was devastated. The life she had prepared for evaporated in a moment. She found herself in the strange position of belonging to the royal inner circle, yet no longer tied to a future on the throne. It was an emotional blow wrapped in political uncertainty, and Mary bore it with quiet composure that astonished her elders. She mourned deeply but privately, allowing herself grief but never collapse. It would be the first of many times she demonstrated her extraordinary capacity for emotional strength. Yet life had a path for her that neither she nor the royal family could have predicted. Eddie's younger brother, Prince George, serious, disciplined, shy, had grown close to Mary during her engagement. They shared similar temperaments, and their mutual grief created a quiet bond between them. George admired Mary's intelligence and steadiness,
Mary saw in George a man shaped by duty, the very quality she valued above all else. Their engagement in 1893 surprised some but delighted many. For Mary, it felt less like being handed from one prince to another, and more like finding a partner whose values mirrored her own.
Their marriage on July 6, 1893, marked the beginning of a lifelong partnership built not on passion but on profound mutual respect. George trusted Mary implicitly. Mary appreciated his unwavering devotion to responsibility. Together, they embodied a model of royal duty at a time when monarchy required stability more than ever. They had 6 children, each raised with the same disciplined structure that governed Mary's own upbringing. She loved them, but her love took the form of expectation rather than indulgence. Her eldest son, David, who would later become Edward VIII, often felt suffocated by her emotional reserve, yet he admired her strength. Mary believed affection should be earned, not given freely, and while this distance shaped her children in complex ways, it also reflected the royal norms of her generation. As George's role in public life grew, Mary stepped gracefully into her responsibilities. She mastered protocol, perfected her public presence, and became a symbol of dignity without ever overshadowing her husband. She collected art, jewelry, and historic artifacts, but not out of vanity. She believed the monarchy must serve as a guardian of national heritage. Her meticulous eye and archival mindset preserved countless pieces of British history that might otherwise have been lost. She believed objects carried stories and that the monarchy was the steward of those stories. Then, in 1901, Queen Victoria died, and the entire royal structure shifted. George's father became King Edward VII, placing George and Mary one step closer to the throne. Mary took this transition seriously. She studied constitutional principles, examined royal traditions, and prepared for the responsibilities she knew were coming. When King Edward VII died in 1910, George became King George V, and Mary became Queen Consort. Her coronation in 1911 reflected the grandeur of a vast empire at its height. Britain ruled territories across the globe, and Mary, adorned in regalia rich with centuries of symbolism, stepped into her role with a calm authority that impressed even the most skeptical observers. She embodied everything the monarchy needed: stability, order, and an unwavering sense of purpose. But beneath the glittering surface, Europe was collapsing. Unseen political tensions were rising, alliances were cracking, and nationalism swept through countries like wildfire. Mary, ever observant, sensed the approaching storm. She saw how nations were drifting into dangerous rivalries and how monarchies across Europe were losing their grip on public confidence. These intuitions proved tragically correct. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand ignited the First World War. For Mary, the war was not merely an international conflict, it was personal. Her cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm II, led Germany. Another cousin, Tsar Nicholas II, ruled Russia. Royal relatives now belonged to opposing sides, and the very idea of monarchy as a unifying force began to disintegrate. Anti-German sentiment in Britain rose sharply. The royal family faced public suspicion due to their German ancestry. Under immense political pressure, King George V made a monumental decision. The royal family would abandon its German surname, Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and adopt a new name, Windsor. It was a symbolic act of reinvention, one Mary supported completely. For her, the monarchy was not about personal identity, but national unity, and she understood that sacrifice was at the core of duty. Throughout the war, Mary worked tirelessly. She visited hospitals and munitions factories, comforted wounded soldiers, and encouraged national rationing. She refused to buy new clothing during the war, choosing instead to have her old gowns restyled. These gestures, though small, resonated with the public. Mary's quiet sense of duty reassured citizens that the monarchy was not detached from their suffering. Yet the war's toll on her was profound. She watched dynasties fall across Europe. She witnessed the Russian monarchy, including her beloved cousins, captured and eventually executed by revolutionaries. She mourned privately, as she always did, but her heart was bruised by the death of a world order she had known since childhood. The First World War ended not only lives, but centuries-old traditions, and Mary understood that the monarchy's survival depended on careful adaptation. The interwar years brought further challenges. Britain faced social upheaval, political tension, and economic struggles. Mary urged modernization where necessary, but insisted on preserving the dignity that defined the monarchy. She encouraged public engagements, supported technological advancements such as radio broadcasts, and became a key influence behind shaping a monarchy that could exist within a rapidly modernizing world. But nothing tested her strength like what came next. In 1936, King George V died, and her eldest son ascended the throne as King Edward VIII. Mary hoped that the responsibilities of kingship would discipline him, but her hopes quickly dimmed. Edward was charming, charismatic, and popular, yet he lacked the sense of duty Mary considered essential to the monarchy. His insistence on marrying Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, pushed the monarchy to the brink of disaster. The government opposed the marriage, the church condemned it, the public was divided. Edward's determination to place personal desire above the crown appalled Mary. When he finally abdicated, after less than a year on the throne, Mary's heartbreak was immense. Her son had walked away from the duty she had spent her entire life preparing him for. She mourned the loss of a king, but she also mourned the loss of a son she could not reach. Still, she never let her personal grief interfere with her public presence. She supported her second son, Albert, now King George VI, as he assumed the throne. George was shy, stammering, and overwhelmed, but Mary guided him with steady wisdom. She strengthened him during the crisis and became an anchor as he navigated a world drifting toward another conflict. When Europe descended into the Second World War in 1939, Mary was 72, yet she refused to withdraw from public life or retreat to safety. She remained in Britain during bombings, visited bombed-out neighborhoods, comforted families, and supported war efforts with the same discipline she had shown decades earlier. Her presence, calm and resolute, reassured a nation under siege. She did not fear the Blitz. She did not flee danger. She believed a monarch, current or former, must share the hardships of the people. She watched her son, George VI, lead with quiet courage. She watched her granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth, begin her journey into public duty. Mary sensed that Elizabeth was destined for greatness and gently prepared her for the future she would inevitably inherit. She taught her poise, discipline, and the importance of self-control. She passed on the values that had sustained her through every storm. The war ended, but Britain emerged changed forever. The empire dissolved. New political movements rose. Society continued evolving toward modernity. Mary, though aging, adapted as best she could, always holding to her belief that dignity must guide change. She continued supporting public causes, attending state functions, and reinforcing the monarchy's sense of continuity. But time was catching up with her. King George VI, the son she had steadied through crisis, struggled with failing health. When he died in 1952, Mary felt a profound grief that few knew how to comprehend. She had outlived her husband, outlived two of her sons, and now outlived the gentle son who had saved the monarchy from collapse. Her once formidable presence grew frail, her steps slower, her voice softer. Yet she clung to life long enough to see Elizabeth become Queen Elizabeth II. She witnessed another generation rise to protect the crown she had spent her entire life strengthening. She died on March 24, 1953, just months before Elizabeth's coronation. She was 85. Mary of Teck's legacy is not one of charisma or popularity, but of endurance, discipline, and unwavering devotion to duty. She survived 2 world wars, the collapse of empires, political revolutions, and the greatest crisis the modern British monarchy ever faced. She held firm through every upheaval, preserving the royal institution with quiet strength. She believed deeply in the monarchy, not as a privilege, but as a responsibility, a trust carried not by individuals, but by generations. Her influence can still be seen today in the rituals, traditions, and values that define the British royal family. She was the bridge between the old world and the new, the keeper of a fading Victorian ethos, and the architect of a monarchy built to survive modernity. Mary of Teck was the queen who never sought the spotlight, yet her shadow stretches across a century. She was steady when the world was trembling. She was disciplined when nations were unraveling. She was resolute when wars tore continents apart. She stood through it all, unshaken, unbroken, unwavering. The queen who survived 2 world wars, and in doing so, ensured that the monarchy itself survived with her. Mary of Teck's early adulthood unfolded in an atmosphere of quiet expectation, the kind that grows heavier with each passing year. By the 1890s, she had become known throughout Europe as a young woman of admirable discipline, refined manners, and thoughtful intelligence. A princess whose reputation rested not on glamour or dramatic flair, but on the steadiness of her character. Her upbringing had been strict and frugal compared to that of many royals, shaping her into someone who valued duty, routine, and purpose above luxury or social ambition. And yet, behind the polished exterior, there lingered a persistent anxiety shared by both her family and those observing her from afar. She was nearing an age at which her prospects for marriage, especially one befitting a woman of her rank, would begin to diminish. In royal circles, the window for securing a suitable match could close quickly and decisively. Her mother worried quietly, often confiding in private letters her fear that Mary's virtues might be overlooked in favor of younger or more outwardly charming princesses. Her father, though outwardly calm, felt the same strain. He knew what was expected of daughters in royal households, and he dreaded the idea that Mary might be left without a role,
drifting on the fringes of court life as an unmarried woman in a world that offered few alternatives. Yet Mary herself seemed to resist panic. She believed, somewhat stubbornly, but also with the gentle optimism that had marked her youth, that the right match would come at the right time. She had been raised to accept destiny, to trust that patience was a virtue not only in spiritual matters, but also in matters of the heart. She devoted herself to her work, her studies, her charitable interests, and the upkeep of her family's modest home. She did not speak openly about the pressure she felt, but it shadowed her nonetheless. Every time another royal engagement was announced for a princess younger or less accomplished than she, Mary would offer her congratulations with admirable composure, even as she felt the silent weight of comparison pressing against her shoulders. Then, unexpectedly and almost abruptly, fate inserted itself into Mary's life in the form of Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, known affectionately within the family as Eddie. He was the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, the firstborn grandson of Queen Victoria, and therefore second in line to the British throne. His future was mapped out from birth. He would one day become king, and whoever married him would ascend to the role of Queen Consort. For a young woman of Mary's background, such a prospect carried both immense honor and daunting responsibility. And yet, when the royal family began to take interest in her as a potential bride for Eddie, it was not merely because of lineage or convenience, but because they saw in her qualities that Eddie badly needed.
Prince Albert Victor was, by the standards of his position, an unusual figure. Handsome, courteous, and naturally gentle, he was enormously likable in public, but he lacked the sharp intellect and strong discipline expected of a future monarch. He was easily influenced by those around him, often adrift in social environments where firmer personalities tended to dominate. His education had been spotty, his interests inconsistent, and his health somewhat fragile. Those who loved him recognized that he required an anchor, someone calm, reliable, and steady, someone who could provide the structure he struggled to create for himself. And in Mary, the royal family perceived exactly that, a young woman who could offer emotional ballast without ever threatening to overshadow him, a partner who would attend to duty as naturally as breathing, and who would preserve the dignity of the monarchy with unwavering seriousness. When the idea of a union between them was presented, Mary approached it with her characteristic restraint. She knew the significance of such a proposal. She also knew that marriages among Europe's royal families were rarely born out of passion alone. They were arrangements of political necessity, dynastic strategy, and social harmony. Still, Mary hoped that affection might grow where duty had first taken root. As she began spending time with Eddie, she found herself warming to him. He was more sensitive than she had expected, more eager to please, more vulnerable beneath the surface. He treated her with respect, even admiration, and Mary, who had learned to keep her emotions contained, allowed herself to picture a life in which she stood not merely beside a prince, but beside a future king. Their engagement, announced in late 1891, was greeted with great enthusiasm by the royal family. Queen Victoria herself was relieved to see her grandson matched with a woman whom she believed would guide him toward a more disciplined and responsible life. Courtiers approved, diplomats approved. Even the often gossiped about upper classes nodded their approval, observing the couple with curiosity but also genuine hope. Mary, too, felt a sense of stability and purpose settling over her. After years of uncertainty, she finally stood on the threshold of a future clearly defined. She would become Eddie's wife, his partner, his queen. She would dedicate herself to his success,
to the crown, to the nation, and perhaps, in time, affection would blossom into love. But destiny is rarely so predictable, and the royal path Mary had begun to anticipate was destined to shatter with startling swiftness. In January 1892, scarcely 6 weeks after their engagement had been formalized, Eddie fell gravely ill. An influenza epidemic had been sweeping through Britain, and although he had always been somewhat frail, no one had imagined the illness would strike him down so swiftly. His condition deteriorated with alarming speed. Physicians hovered over him day and night. The royal family gathered around his bedside, struggling to comprehend the rapid turn of events. And Mary, who had not yet fully adjusted to the idea of becoming his wife, but who had already grown attached to him, found herself facing the unimaginable.
On a bitterly cold winter day, at just 28 years old, Prince Albert Victor succumbed to his illness. His death sent shockwaves through the monarchy, through the nation, and through the lives of everyone who had believed in the promise of his future. The Prince of Wales lost his eldest son. Queen Victoria lost her firstborn grandson. The country lost the man who was meant to be its next king. And Mary, quiet, dutiful, hopeful Mary, lost not only her fiancé, but the entire world she had been preparing herself to step into. Mary's grief was profound, though she bore it with the restraint that had shaped her entire upbringing. She mourned Eddie not only as the man she had been promised to, but as a gentle soul whose life had ended before it could properly unfold. Yet her sorrow was layered with another, quieter despair. She had spent years molding herself into a woman ready to serve as Queen Consort, and now the path had vanished abruptly beneath her feet. She found herself in an emotional limbo, suspended between the royal world that had embraced her and the uncertain future that now lay before her. The British royal family continued to care for her deeply, perhaps even more so in the wake of Eddie's death, but the official role she had been meant to occupy was gone. In private moments, Mary was haunted by questions that offered no answers. What would become of her? Would she return to the quieter, more modest life she had known before the engagement? Would she once again find herself caught in the anxious cycle of waiting for another match, uncertain whether another opportunity of such magnitude would ever appear? Her family tried to comfort her, but they too sensed the precariousness of her new position. Neither fully inside nor outside the royal circle, Mary stood in a peculiar space, valued, respected, but without a defined future. And yet, even in this time of deep uncertainty, something remarkable was happening, slowly and quietly. The royal family, mourning Eddie's death, observed how Mary conducted herself with dignity and compassion. She attended funerary rites, supported the grieving members of the royal household, and carried herself with a gravity that far exceeded what might have been expected of a woman her age. Far from retreating into personal sorrow, she seemed to strengthen, as though hardship revealed the true depth of her character. Those around her took note. Her patience, her steadiness, her profound sense of duty, qualities they had admired before, now appeared even more essential, even more valuable. Eddie's younger brother, Prince George, shared in the family's grief. He had been close to Eddie, close in age, close in upbringing, and deeply shaken by his death. As the second son, George had never been groomed as rigorously for kingship as Eddie, but fate had now thrust that responsibility upon him. He watched Mary with a quiet, growing admiration for the resilience she showed during the darkest moments of their collective mourning.
While he had always respected her, he now saw in her a strength that matched the growing weight of the crown he was destined to inherit. But Mary, for now, remained suspended between what was and what might have been, living each day with the solemn knowledge that the life she had prepared for had vanished almost at the moment it had begun. She was beloved by the royal family, cherished for her loyalty and grace, yet she held no official place within their future. The path ahead was unmarked, uncertain, and profoundly altered by tragedy. Still, the story of Mary of Teck would not end in that limbo. Her destiny had been shaken, but it had not been erased. The currents of royal history had begun to shift around her, and although she could not yet see it, the collapse of one future had opened the door to another, one that would test her strength even more deeply and shape her into one of the most enduring and consequential queens Britain would ever know. Fate had not abandoned her. It had simply paused, waiting for its next moment to redefine her life. Prince George, the Duke of York, had always lived in the shadow of his elder brother, Prince Albert Victor, known to the family as Eddie, and he had accepted that shadow with the quiet humility and steady resolve that defined his character. From the time they were boys, the public had looked to Eddie as the heir to the throne, while George stood slightly behind him, not irrelevant, but certainly not central to the great machinery of succession. George never envied Eddie for it. He simply assumed that his purpose in life was to support, to assist, and to uphold the dignity of the crown in whatever secondary form destiny assigned him. When Eddie became engaged to Mary of Teck, George had watched the development with sincere approval. He admired Mary, her thoughtfulness, her modesty, her intelligence, but he had never entertained the idea of any deeper connection with her. She was Eddie's intended, and George respected boundaries with a kind of moral clarity that left no room for ambiguity or wishful thinking. As he observed the pair together during their engagement, he felt a quiet pride on Eddie's behalf. He believed Mary would stabilize his older brother, bring discipline to his occasionally drifting character, and offer the monarchy a consort whose dignity matched the gravity of the institution. But fate, ever unpredictable, had intervened. Eddie's sudden death in January 1892 had struck the royal family with the force of a storm, and George felt it as both a personal and national tragedy. Eddie had been his companion since childhood, his partner in lessons, in family duties, in royal appearances, and now the space he left behind felt unbearably large. George carried his grief inwardly, expressing little outward emotion even as he felt its full weight pressing against his chest, constricting his breath, shaping his days with a sense of hollow quiet. And within that sorrow, another grief moved silently, sympathy for Mary, who had not only lost her fiancé, but had also been cast out of the future she had been preparing to embrace. George had known Mary only as his brother's intended wife, but he found himself noticing the dignity with which she navigated the aftermath, the calm way she offered comfort to the royal family, the humility with which she stepped back into the shadows without complaint. The royal household watched Mary closely during those months of mourning. They saw her strength, the kind that does not shout or seek attention, but instead reveals itself in steadiness, in compassion, in the persistent fulfillment of duty, even when personal sorrow weighs heavily upon the heart. Queen Victoria in particular was moved by Mary's conduct. The Queen, having endured losses of her own, her husband, several children and grandchildren, recognized in Mary a resilience that was rare and precious. She also recognized something else, a potential solution to the problem that had arisen with Eddie's death. With the heir gone, the line of succession shifted to George, who now stood as the future king. And if the monarchy were to remain stable, the family needed to ensure that George, too, found a partner who could support him, fortify him, and walk beside him through the inevitable trials of rule. It was not long before the idea of a new match, one that would have seemed unthinkable only months earlier, began to take shape. Mary, still beloved by the family, possessed every quality they desired in a future queen. She was disciplined, intelligent, moral, and unwaveringly loyal. She was not a woman given to frivolity, nor one who sought the glittering attention of court life. She preferred order to excess, study to idle chatter, sincerity to flamboyance. And George, for all his seriousness, needed a partner who could match his temperament. But the matter was delicate. To propose a marriage between a woman and the brother of her deceased fiancé required tact, sensitivity, and an understanding of both personal emotions and public perception. The family could not simply present the idea to Mary as though she were a dynastic piece to be moved from one branch of the family tree to another. They had to consider her grief, her dignity, and her sense of self. Likewise, George could not simply step into his brother's place. He had to determine whether such a union was truly right, morally, emotionally, and spiritually. For months, Mary withdrew from the public eye, living quietly and observing the traditional mourning period. She dedicated her days to reading, prayer, private reflection, and the support of her parents, who watched with gentle concern as she navigated her altered future. She did not complain. She did not indulge in self-pity. But privately, she felt lost. Not only had she lost Eddie, but she had also lost the clearly defined role she had been ready to assume. She had accepted wholeheartedly the responsibilities of a future queen. She had prepared to serve the nation, to uphold the monarchy, to support Eddie in whatever challenges awaited him. Now, all of that had dissolved. Then, quietly at first, George re-entered her life, not as Eddie's brother, not as the prince newly thrust into a future he had not sought, but as a gentle presence. He began by writing her letters, not filled with grand declarations or romantic sentiment, but with genuine words of sympathy and respectful inquiry. He asked after her health. He expressed his sorrow for her grief. He told her how deeply the entire family valued her and how much they admired the strength she had shown in a time of despair. Mary was touched. George had always been kind to her, but kindness from a man so reserved was not something she took lightly. She read his letters with care, responding with equal sincerity. She had always appreciated George's quiet seriousness and sensed in him a depth that others overlooked. The more they corresponded, the more Mary began to see him not merely as the brother of the man she had lost, but as a man in his own right, a man of integrity, discipline, and profound duty. Their bond developed gradually, almost imperceptibly. When they saw each other at family gatherings, they gravitated toward one another with a natural ease. Their conversations were never dramatic or urgent. Instead, they were thoughtful, measured, and genuine. George found comfort in Mary's steadiness. Mary found solace in George's sincerity. Their shared grief became a bridge between them, but it was not grief alone that drew them close. It was something more subtle, a recognition that their temperaments aligned with remarkable harmony. The royal family, attentive observers of this growing connection,
encouraged it quietly. Queen Victoria, always mindful of the stability of the monarchy, believed that Mary was not only suitable but ideal for George. And so, with cautious approval and sensitive timing, the idea of a marriage between them began to take formal shape. When the proposal finally came in the spring of 1893, it was handled with great care. George approached Mary with humility, acknowledging the unusual circumstances, acknowledging her past grief, acknowledging her right to refuse without judgment. But he also spoke with a sincere heart, expressing his admiration for her character, his belief that they could create a strong partnership, and his hope that she would consider building a life with him. Mary listened, deeply moved. She had not expected such a proposal, and yet it felt strangely right. She respected George immensely. She trusted him. She shared his values. And though her love for Eddie had been real, it had been the love of duty, of potential, of gentle affection, not the deep, growing bond she sensed forming with George. She said yes. Their engagement, announced in the same year, was met with widespread approval, but also a measure of public curiosity. Some whispered that Mary had been passed on like a dynastic responsibility, an object of royal convenience. Others romanticized the union as the triumph of shared grief transformed into shared hope. But those who knew George and Mary intimately understood the truth. Theirs was a partnership of mutual respect, sincere affection, and compatible purpose. They were not a dramatic pair. They were not a couple defined by fiery passion or extravagant emotion. They were, instead, a team. Their wedding on July 6, 1893, at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace reflected their personalities, solemn, dignified, and deeply meaningful. The ceremony unfolded with royal grandeur, but beneath the pomp and tradition, there was an unmistakable sincerity in the way George looked at Mary, and the way Mary looked back at him. They understood, clearly, what they were stepping into. The future they were accepting together was not merely one of royal obligation. It was one of profound responsibility to the nation, to the crown, and to each other. In their early married years, George and Mary developed a rhythm that suited them perfectly. Their shared sense of discipline created a household marked by order, stability, and thoughtful routine. They were united not only by affection, but by purpose. George valued Mary's intelligence and reliability, and he increasingly relied on her judgment in matters of protocol, diplomacy, and family. Mary admired George's steadfastness, his integrity, and his strong devotion to his role. She became not only his partner, but his anchor, offering unwavering support as he grew into the responsibilities that fate had unexpectedly placed upon him. Their love, though not flamboyant, deepened with time. They discovered humor in each other, warmth in each other, and comfort in the quiet moments they shared away from the public eye. Their marriage was not a fairy tale. It was not a whirlwind romance. It was something far rarer, a union built on mutual respect, shared values, complementary strengths, and a deep, enduring trust. As the years progressed, George and Mary evolved into one of the most effective royal partnerships of the modern age. Their differences balanced each other. Their similarities strengthened each other. Together, they would guide the monarchy through public scrutiny, political transformation, national crises, and, eventually, 2 world wars. What began as an unexpected union, born of tragedy,
shaped by destiny and nurtured by character, became the foundation of a reign marked by stability and resilience. Their marriage, forged not in youthful infatuation, but in mature understanding, would ultimately prove stronger and more enduring than anyone could have predicted when the shy, serious prince first began writing letters to the woman who had once been promised to his brother. For in George and Mary, destiny had not merely repaired the broken path left by tragedy, it had revealed a new and stronger path entirely, one that would shape the course of British history for decades to come. Mary of Teck adapted to her role as the Duchess of York with a seriousness that bordered on the sacred, as though the responsibilities of royalty were not merely duties, but a kind of moral calling she had been preparing for all her life. She did not approach royal life as a glittering privilege or as an indulgence in finery and honor. Instead, she treated it as an immense obligation, a demanding vocation that would require all her discipline, all her inner strength, and every ounce of her unshakable resolve. Unlike many who married into the royal family, Mary had not grown up in an environment overflowing with wealth. Her childhood home had been modest by royal standards, shaped by a family that prized thrift, education, and moral uprightness. She had been taught to polish her own shoes, to mend garments, to accept discomfort without complaint, and to find dignity in routine and order. These early lessons would shape her profoundly, for when she entered royal life, she brought with her a discipline forged in simplicity rather than privilege. And because she had never been spoiled, she did not expect to be. From the moment she woke each morning, Mary adhered to routines so strict they became legendary within the walls of York Cottage. She dressed at the same hour every day, consulted her schedule with military precision, and maintained a household where punctuality was not a suggestion, but a rule. Her clothes were chosen with great care, not for ostentation, but for propriety. Her demeanor was measured and calm, never too warm, never too cold. She embodied the monarchy's ideal of steadiness, believing that consistency was not merely a virtue, but a visible symbol of national stability. Those who served her both admired and feared her, for although she was never cruel, she expected excellence. She demanded the same standards from others that she fought tirelessly to uphold in herself. To her children, 6 in total, she was both mother and monarch, disciplinarian and guide, but rarely a figure of soft warmth. Her love for them was unquestionable, steady as granite, but she was shaped by Victorian ideals of motherhood, in which visible affection was viewed as indulgent, even weakening. She saw herself as the architect of their character, not their companion. Her presence filled every room she entered, composed, imposing, and dignified. Even as infants, the children understood instinctively that their mother was not someone whose lap was easily climbed into, or whose arms opened at the slightest whimper. Instead, she expressed her care through routines, structure, education, and duty. She ensured that her children were raised within an environment of order, where servants followed strict guidelines, and the young princes and princesses learned early that their lives were dedicated to something larger than themselves. David, the eldest, the boy who would one day become King Edward VIII and then shock the world by abdication, felt the chilly distance between himself and his mother more acutely than the others. Sensitive, spirited, and emotionally volatile, he craved warmth that Mary did not know how to give. He admired her, feared her, and longed for a kind of maternal affection he spent his entire life seeking in other women. Mary was aware of this gap, though she would never have spoken of it aloud. She loved David, but she could not alter her nature, and the structure she provided seemed to him not comforting but restrictive. The pattern would define his life. He would grow into a man who rebelled against duty, who fled from the expectations Mary believed sacred, and who sought in romance the softness he never found at home. Yet his siblings, Bertie, Mary, Henry, George, and John, accepted their mother's demeanor more readily, either because they were less sensitive or because they understood the weight she carried on her shoulders. Bertie, the shy second son who would one day become George VI, inherited Mary's seriousness but not her confidence. Her firm standards often intimidated him, but he internalized her values more completely than David ever did. The younger children, especially the fragile Prince John, knew Mary's care in small, subtle ways: the precise management of their health, the thoughtful oversight of their education, the quiet concern she expressed when illness shadowed their nursery. Mary was not a mother who lavished kisses or whispered soft lullabies, but her children were never neglected. Her love was expressed through consistency. She believed, with absolute conviction, that stability was the highest expression of maternal devotion. Beyond her role as a mother, Mary immersed herself in a passion that would become one of her greatest contributions to the monarchy: collecting. But her collecting was not a whimsical hobby, nor was it driven by vanity or materialism. Rather, it stemmed from her deep conviction that the monarchy was not just a living family, but a custodian of national heritage. Mary believed that art, jewels, furniture, documents, and artifacts were not merely beautiful objects, but pieces of history that deserved preservation. She saw the royal collection not as decor, but as a treasury of British identity. She traveled through palaces, storerooms, attics, and auction houses with a discerning eye, identifying objects of artistic or historical significance that belonged, in her view, within the royal archives. Her attention to detail was astounding. She could recall the provenance of a vase, the maker of a piece of furniture, the lineage of a diamond brooch, or the historical context of a portrait with astonishing precision. Her work was methodical, scholarly, and unending. She rearranged galleries, restored neglected masterpieces, cataloged forgotten heirlooms, and rescued pieces that previous generations had allowed to fall into disarray. Her acquisitions were guided by a deep sense of stewardship. She believed that the monarchy must preserve the cultural memory of the nation, safeguarding it for future generations. This belief would enrich the royal collection so profoundly that many historians later called Mary one of the greatest archivists the monarchy ever had. Yet, as Mary immersed herself in the preservation of the past, the world around her was hurtling toward an uncertain future. Europe's royal families, interconnected through a complex web of marriages, alliances, and bloodlines, had long believed themselves secure atop the continent's social order. But as the 20th century approached, tremors of change reverberated across Europe. Industrialization had transformed nations, shifting power from aristocratic dynasties to political parties, parliaments, and organized labor. New ideologies challenged old hierarchies. Socialism, nationalism, republicanism, and militarism all spread with unsettling speed. Monarchies toppled across Europe like fragile glass. In France, in Portugal, and in the Balkans,
revealing how vulnerable even the oldest dynasties could be in a rapidly modernizing world. Mary was not a political theorist, nor did she immerse herself in ideological debates, but she sensed change like a shift in the air before a storm. She followed international events with growing concern, reading newspapers, listening to diplomatic briefings, and asking her husband thoughtful questions about parliamentary developments. She understood, far more keenly than many realized, that the monarchy's survival depended on adaptability, discretion, and unyielding dignity. The old world, glittering courts, elaborate etiquette, unquestioned royal authority, was fading. Mary recognized that the crown would need to evolve to survive. Even as she preserved the past through her collections, she prepared herself and her family for a world that would demand a more restrained, symbolic monarchy rather than one that wielded absolute influence. And then, in 1901, the first great transformation of her life arrived. Queen Victoria, the grandmother of Europe and the figure who had defined an entire era, passed away at the age of 81. Her death reverberated across the world. For decades, she had been a symbol of continuity, morality, and imperial might. Her passing marked the end of the Victorian age and the beginning of a new century whose contours were still uncertain. Mary watched the ceremonies of mourning with a profound awareness that history was shifting beneath the feet of the monarchy. With Victoria's death, Mary's father-in-law ascended the throne as King Edward VII, and Mary herself stepped one rank closer to the destiny she had long suspected would one day be hers. Under Edward VII, the court transformed dramatically. The new king favored a more opulent, cosmopolitan style than his mother had allowed, shifting the tone of royal life toward elegance, diplomacy, and social engagement. Mary adapted to the new era with characteristic discipline. She attended events, supported her husband in public duties, and studied the intricacies of statecraft with increasing intensity. She watched George learn from his father, observing Edward's charisma, his diplomatic skill, his understanding of modern politics, and she encouraged George's quiet efforts to prepare himself for kingship. She understood, better than anyone, that George would never possess his father's flamboyance, but she also knew that George's steadiness would one day prove invaluable. As the years passed, Mary prepared herself with equal determination. She studied constitutional law, read widely, learned the nuances of court politics, and developed a keen sensitivity to international affairs. She understood that her future role would not simply require grace. It would require intellect, resilience, and an unwavering sense of duty. And she honed these qualities in silence, confident that preparation was the highest form of loyalty she could offer both her husband and the nation. Then, in 1910, the moment she had anticipated for nearly 2 decades arrived. King Edward VII died suddenly at the age of 68, and the monarchy shifted once again. The crown, heavy with history and expectation, passed to her husband. George became King George. And Mary of Teck, after a lifetime of preparation, after years of disciplined study and dutiful practice, stepped forward into her destiny. Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. When King Edward VII's long, indulgent reign drew to its final breath in May of 1910, the British Empire braced for a transition that felt at once inevitable and seismic. The aging monarch, beloved by some and criticized by others, had been the genial face of an empire sprawling across continents, his personality larger than the throne he occupied. But with his passing, the weight of that empire, its power, its anxieties, its hopes, shifted onto the shoulders of his second son, the quiet, resolute Prince George, Duke of York. And beside him stood Mary, the woman who had once been engaged to his older brother, but had become, through a twist of history and the mysterious arithmetic of fate, the partner he would rely on for the rest of his life. Mary of Teck, now Queen Consort, entered the stage of global history with the quiet gravity of someone who understood that she had not merely inherited a title, she had inherited the emotional and symbolic burden of holding a vast and restless empire steady. The coronation in 1911 was designed to anchor that transition in the ancient pageantry that Britain wielded better than any other nation. It was a spectacle of embroidered robes, towering plumes, glittering jewels, and solemn rituals repeated for centuries. It was imperial theater in its most deliberate and calculated form. But for Mary, every step across the stone floors of Westminster Abbey carried meaning far deeper than the spectacles seen by the millions watching. Her gown, heavy with embroidery representing dominions scattered across the globe, reminded her with every movement that she was more than a queen. She was the symbolic mother of a sprawling empire, one that demanded from her not affection, but stability, continuity, and calm. She wore jewels that traced their provenance to centuries past, diamonds that had witnessed the rise and fall of monarchs, pearls that had outlived dynastic battles, sapphires that had adorned queens who died before Britain had even imagined itself as an empire. As they caught the light of the cathedral's high windows, Mary felt the weight of their history and the expectation embedded within them. She moved with a precision that people thought came from formality, but in truth came from a deep understanding that monarchy was not simply governance or spectacle, but the performance of order. Every gesture, every nod, every moment of stillness was a reassurance to a nation that needed to believe the world was stable, even when it wasn't. Mary was not flashy. Those who knew her intimately, and few actually did, for she lived behind a carefully maintained reserve, understood that she did not hunger for attention, even though the world watched her every second. She had been raised not for the spotlight, but for duty, and she carried that sense of responsibility like a second spine. She knew that her presence, her clothing, her silence, even her stillness could be interpreted as reassurance or disruption. And so she mastered the art of symbolism with a precision that astonished even her critics. She understood that monarchy, especially in the modern age, was theater, not frivolous, not manipulative, but necessary theater. A nation, she believed, needed myths as much as it needed governance. It needed ritual as much as it needed legislation. And if she had a role in maintaining that delicate psychological architecture, she would perform it with perfection. Her walk during ceremonies was measured, steady, confident, but never ostentatious. Her posture remained upright even after hours of standing, as though she were bearing not only her crown, but the expectations of millions. Her expressions rarely betrayed emotion. She knew that joy, sorrow, fear, or uncertainty, any one of them displayed at the wrong moment, could echo across newspapers and corridors of power alike. Her silence was often interpreted as coldness,
But in truth, it was a strategic silence. The silence of someone who knew that mystery could stabilize a monarchy far more effectively than familiarity. She was not aloof, she was calculated. And calculation, in the realm of monarchs, was a form of service. But behind that carefully orchestrated calm, Mary possessed a piercing intelligence that those outside her household rarely recognized. Courtiers often mistook her reserve for detachment, her quietness for facility. But she observed everything. She watched politicians spar in Parliament and read between the lines of their speeches. She followed newspapers obsessively, tracking not only what they printed, but what they implied about the shifting mood of a restless public. She listened to ambassadors with a mind that catalogued details, patterns, inconsistencies. And within weeks of becoming queen, she sensed something that few around her fully understood. The world was balancing precariously on the edge of catastrophe. Europe, in the early 20th century, appeared stable from a distance. It was a continent of monarchies and alliances, a chessboard of dynastic ties, treaties, rivalries, and imperial ambitions. But Mary saw the cracks beneath the polished surface. She saw how easily old alliances could fracture under pressure. She noticed the rise of nationalist movements simmering beneath the pomp and prestige of empire. She watched industrialization race ahead of political reform, fueling both wealth and resentment. She recognized that newspapers were becoming bolder, less deferential, more willing to question the institutions that had once stood above scrutiny. She sensed that courts, royal and political, were growing uneasy, no longer able to rely on tradition alone to command respect. And she understood that politicians were becoming more divided, their rhetoric sharper, their loyalties more fragile. In the drawing rooms of Buckingham Palace, she listened quietly as ministers discussed the growing volatility in the Balkans. She studied the telegrams reporting diplomatic incidents that flickered in and out of public consciousness. She heard whispers about Germany's ambition, Austria's desperation, Russia's unpredictability. And though she said little, she stored every detail. George once remarked that Mary had the memory of an elephant and the instincts of a strategist, though he rarely shared this opinion with others, for to admit how much he relied on her seemed almost to diminish his own authority. But he knew that Mary could read the emotional temperature of Europe with uncanny accuracy. She also felt something less tangible but equally important, a shift in the hearts of ordinary people. During public engagements, even amid cheering crowds, she detected an undercurrent, a kind of restless disquiet that had not been present a decade earlier. She saw it in the way people looked at her, in the tone of their questions, in the stories they told her about their lives. She sensed that respect for monarchy was becoming less automatic, more conditional. People admired the crown, but they were starting to question the fairness of the world it represented. They were beginning to demand more from their governments and institutions. And Mary realized that the monarchy would need to adapt if it hoped to survive the storms she believed were coming. Her instincts were not born of fear, they were born of observation. Mary had lived through enough personal upheaval, family struggles, lost engagements, shifting fortunes, to recognize the signs of instability. She knew that beneath the surface of every calm period, tensions quietly reorganized themselves, waiting for ignition. And Europe, she believed, was full of sparks. She spoke of this only indirectly to George, for she understood that burdening him with her anxieties would serve little purpose. Instead, she encouraged him to strengthen diplomatic relationships, to deepen his involvement in military preparations, to cultivate alliances not through pomp but through sincerity. She urged him to listen carefully to his ministers and to remain wary of easy assurances. Yet even as she prepared herself mentally for a looming crisis, she never allowed the public to see her concern. She continued to perform her role with impeccable poise, attending ceremonies, visiting hospitals, supporting charities, meeting dignitaries from every corner of the empire. Her presence radiated calm, even when her thoughts churned with worry. For Mary believed that a queen must absorb the anxieties of her people, not amplify them. She believed that her stability could become their stability, at least for a moment, and moments mattered. As the years unfolded, Mary's sense of foreboding deepened. The alliances that had once seemed solid now appeared brittle, held together by convenience more than conviction. The political climate across Europe grew tense, as though the continent were inhaling slowly, preparing for an exhale that would shake the world. Mary read newspapers discussing military buildups, colonial disputes, Balkan assassinations, and nationalist rhetoric that curled like smoke across borders, and she knew that smoke preceded fire. She watched the British Parliament wrestle with domestic unrest, suffrage debates, labor strikes, Irish tensions. She understood that these internal frictions weakened the nation's ability to confront external threats. She heard generals speak in confident tones about readiness, and though she respected their expertise, she sensed an unsettling complacency in their words. She feared that Britain, like much of Europe, was sleepwalking toward a disaster it could not comprehend. She watched the British Parliament wrestle with domestic unrest, suffrage debates, labor strikes, Irish tensions. She understood that these internal frictions weakened the nation's ability to confront external threats. She heard generals speak in confident tones about readiness, and though she respected their expertise, she sensed an unsettling complacency in their words. She feared that Britain, like much of Europe, was sleepwalking toward a disaster it could not comprehend.
And so she waited, not passively, but watchfully. She held her composure, her silence, her symbolic steadiness, even as she felt an empire trembling before the world did. Something in her, shaped by the difficult childhood she rarely spoke about, had always been attuned to the subtle vibrations of coming change. She recognized the fragility of things that appeared solid, and that recognition, more than anything else, guided her. Her life as queen was therefore a strange paradox. She stood at the center of glittering ceremonies, of jewels and crowns, of parades and banquets, yet she felt constantly aware of the fragility behind the brilliance. And that recognition, more than anything else, guided her. Her life as queen was therefore a strange paradox. She stood at the center of glittering ceremonies, of jewels and crowns, of parades and banquets, yet she felt constantly aware of the fragility behind the brilliance. She lived in palaces, but thought often about the foundations beneath them. She mastered the art of royal presence, but she spent her quietest moments contemplating how quickly the world could shift beneath even the most established institutions. And when Europe finally plunged into war in 1914, when the alliances shattered, when armies mobilized, when uncertainty darkened every horizon, Mary was not surprised. Saddened, yes, deeply, profoundly, but not surprised. She had felt the tremors long before most others had noticed them. She had sensed the approaching storm years before the clouds became visible. And now, as queen, She would face the unthinkable with the same precision, resilience, and calm that had defined her since the day she first stepped into the role. For Mary of Teck, the new queen who had once walked through coronation halls shimmering with imperial jewels, the true test of monarchy was not in moments of celebration. It was in the moments when the world fractured and needed something, someone to hold on to. And Mary, with her quiet strength and unflinching composure, prepared herself to become that anchor, even as the empire she served braced itself for upheaval on a scale no monarch had ever witnessed. In the summer of 1914, the world teetered on the edge of catastrophe, and few felt the tremors as acutely as Mary, the Queen Consort of the United Kingdom. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo, a single bullet fired in the shadow of empire, ignited a conflagration that would engulf the continent, and soon the entire globe. From palaces in London to courtrooms in Berlin, from imperial halls in St. Petersburg to the cafes of Paris, the ripples of that act spread with a speed that defied comprehension. For Mary, however, the war was never merely a geopolitical crisis. It was intensely personal. The world she had known, the delicate lattice of family alliances and dynastic ties that had guided European monarchies for centuries, suddenly fractured. Her cousins, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany and Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, were now commanders of armies locked in a deadly struggle, a conflict that demanded loyalty to nations over kinship. The very bloodlines that had once bound Europe together now tore it apart. Cousin fought cousin. Tradition was pitted against modernity, and the world Mary had been trained to navigate with grace and composure seemed to collapse overnight. The impact of war reached far beyond the battlefields, striking at the heart of British society and the monarchy itself. Anti-German sentiment surged across the nation like wildfire. Streets and newspapers erupted with suspicion and hostility, directed at anyone bearing German connections. Mary, whose lineage traced to the German ducal house of Teck, felt the pressures of heritage collide painfully with loyalty to her adopted country. Though she had lived as a British princess her entire life and had embraced her role with unwavering devotion, her surname, her ancestry, and the very essence of her heritage became points of contention. The whispers in the corridors of power were loud. How could a queen with German blood preside over a nation at war with Germany? Public opinion, driven by fear and nationalism, demanded clarity, and the monarchy, ever sensitive to perception, understood that symbolic action was as critical as strategic leadership. King George V, Mary's steadfast husband, took a step that would resonate through history. He enacted a change that was both profoundly symbolic and politically shrewd. The royal family renounced its Germanic heritage in name, becoming henceforth the House of Windsor. It was a historic rebranding, a deliberate assertion of British identity over dynastic origin. The move was more than mere semantics. It was a declaration to the people that the monarchy stood with the nation, that loyalty and duty to Britain outweighed any ancestral tie. Mary, ever the embodiment of composure and duty, supported the decision without hesitation. She understood instinctively that sacrifice, both personal and symbolic, was essential in times of national crisis. Duty demanded that private sentiments be subordinated to public need, and the Queen performed that sacrifice with quiet dignity, acknowledging that even her own lineage
could be surrendered in service to the stability of the monarchy and the unity of the country.
As the war unfolded, Mary's role expanded in ways that demanded every ounce of her energy, intelligence, and emotional strength. She became a figure of tireless service, moving through hospitals, military wards, and relief centers with a resolute purpose that left observers in awe. From the moment she set foot in the wards, she was present not as a ceremonial observer, but as a participant in the lives of soldiers, nurses, and families torn apart by the conflict. She comforted the wounded with quiet empathy, offering words of solace, attentive presence, and encouragement to those grappling with injuries that would leave them forever changed. She attended to soldiers returning from the front, whose eyes reflected horrors that defied language, and she navigated their grief with an understanding born of her own experiences with loss and duty. Every handshake, every nod, every moment of attentive listening carried significance. Mary understood that her presence was a stabilizing force, that the monarchy's moral authority was magnified through acts of compassion. Her dedication extended beyond personal visits. Mary actively promoted relief efforts, coordinating with charitable organizations and social services to ensure that aid reached those most affected by the war. She lent her support to initiatives aimed at rationing, conservation, and civilian welfare, recognizing that the home front was as critical to the nation's survival as the trenches abroad. In an era when material scarcity could easily undermine morale, Mary led by example. She refused to purchase new clothes during the war years, instead having her existing garments carefully altered and adapted. This seemingly small gesture was laden with symbolic weight. It demonstrated solidarity with the British people, an acknowledgement that even the Queen was subject to the sacrifices required by national crisis. Her composure, combined with tangible actions, communicated a profound message. In times of collective suffering, no one, not even the monarchy, was exempt from responsibility. Yet, while she worked tirelessly in the public sphere, the private consequences of the war weighed heavily upon her. Europe's dynasties, once intertwined in an intricate web of alliances and kinship, began to crumble under the pressure of modern conflict. Mary watched, with a heart both steeled and breaking, as old friends and relatives fell victim to the horrors that unfolded. The Russian monarchy, her cousins, the Romanovs, were executed in the upheaval of 1918, their deaths emblematic of the wider disintegration of imperial order across the continent. She grieved these losses profoundly, yet she never allowed public display of sorrow to compromise her composure. Her grief was private, contained behind the steely exterior that the nation had come to rely upon. The juxtaposition of her personal loss against her public role highlighted a paradox at the core of her character. She bore humanity's deepest sorrows without faltering in duty, channeling personal devastation into strength for the sake of her people. Mary's understanding of the war was complex and deeply reflective. She recognized that the conflict was not merely a military or political struggle. It represented the end of an epoch. The Victorian age, with its certainties, hierarchies, and imperial grandeur, had been shattered. Empires that once seemed eternal were now vulnerable. Monarchs, once untouchable, were either overthrown, executed, or forced to abdicate.
traditional certainties gave way to modern anxieties, and the world Mary had grown up in, the world that had defined her expectations, her upbringing, her sense of order, was irrevocably altered. The First World War was more than a contest of armies. It was the dismantling of old certainties, the birth of a volatile modernity in which the rules were unknown and the consequences of failure immeasurable. Amid this chaos, Mary's steadfastness became not only a personal hallmark, but a vital component of national stability. While politicians debated, generals strategized, and citizens suffered, she remained a symbol of continuity. She embodied the resilience of the monarchy, the calm center in a whirlwind of uncertainty. In her quiet dignity, in her unwavering commitment to duty, the British people found reassurance. Mary's presence suggested that, despite the upheavals and the unprecedented scale of suffering, the monarchy could endure. She projected strength not through force or rhetoric, but through example, through tireless work, disciplined attention to public needs, and an unbroken poise that modeled perseverance and courage. Her support extended to every corner of wartime life. She engaged with charitable organizations focused on the care of prisoners of war, the support of widows and orphans, and the rehabilitation of wounded soldiers. She understood the psychological as well as the physical toll of war, attending to the morale of nurses and volunteers with the same meticulous care she applied to state affairs. She visited factories producing munitions and essential wartime supplies, recognizing that the labor and sacrifices of ordinary citizens were as vital to victory as the heroism of soldiers on the front. Her public example reinforced the idea that the war required collective endurance, that unity was the nation's strength, and that each person's contribution mattered. Throughout these years, Mary maintained a relentless discipline in both appearance and action. Her wardrobe remained practical and conservative, emblematic of the austerity she expected from the nation. Even as she moved through a world of glittering court functions and ceremonial duties, she projected the ethos of restraint. There were no frivolous gowns, no ostentatious displays, no indulgence in luxury that might alienate a population burdened by scarcity and loss. Every detail, from the alteration of old garments to her demeanor in public, was calculated to align the monarchy with the shared sacrifices of its people. Mary's understanding of symbolism was profound. She knew that morale could be bolstered by visible examples of solidarity, that the monarchy's legitimacy relied as much on perception as on law, and that her personal choices could echo across the consciousness of a nation under siege. The war, however, was merciless in its reach. Mary bore witness to the relentless human cost of industrialized conflict. Villages obliterated, entire battalions annihilated, families torn apart. She understood the enormity of the suffering, and yet she remained committed to the principle that leadership required calm and continuity. To falter publicly, to show despair, would be to weaken the nation's resolve. And so she absorbed sorrow silently, allowing her inner life to be a reservoir from which she drew courage, compassion, and strength for those around her. This capacity to internalize grief while projecting stability became a defining aspect of her queenship, one that historians would later cite as crucial to the survival and relevance of the British monarchy during its most perilous hour. Mary's perspective on the war was also intensely reflective. She contemplated the irony that familial bonds, once thought to unify Europe's monarchies, had become entangled in a deadly conflict. Cousins who had shared childhood memories, family dinners, and the intimacy of royal life now commanded opposing armies, issuing orders that would inevitably lead to death and devastation. She mourned not only the human toll, but the symbolic collapse of the dynastic world she had been born into, a world where diplomacy and marriage had once formed a lattice of stability. That lattice was gone, shattered by nationalism, industrialized warfare, and the inexorable forces of history. She perceived, with a mixture of grief and clarity, that the modern world had arrived not with gradual evolution, but with the violent eruption of the First World War, and that the monarchy she served would need to adapt profoundly in order to endure. Yet, even amid this turbulence, Mary never lost sight of her purpose. She understood that the monarchy's survival depended on the embodiment of continuity, stability, and moral authority. In every visit, every charitable act, every public engagement, she reaffirmed the monarchy's relevance. While empires fell and dynasties dissolved across Europe, the British crown remained anchored in public service, ritual, and symbolic leadership. Mary's tireless efforts ensured that the monarchy's presence was felt not as a distant institution, but as a living, breathing embodiment of national resilience. Her example encouraged the population to endure, to maintain cohesion, and to uphold the values for which so many soldiers were fighting abroad. In retrospect, the First World War was not merely a historical event for Mary. It was a crucible that defined her reign, tested her character, and solidified her legacy. It was a period in which personal grief intersected with public duty, in which the stakes of survival extended far beyond one's own life to encompass the endurance of a nation, the preservation of an institution, and the moral fortitude of a people. Mary emerged from this crucible with her composure intact, her resolve strengthened, and her sense of purpose sharpened. She had witnessed the end of the world she had known, the collapse of empires, the fall of dynasties, the death of old orders. And yet, through unwavering discipline, tireless service, and profound emotional strength, she ensured that the monarchy she served not only survived, but retained its relevance in a dramatically transformed world. The First World War, with all its horrors and losses, became a testament to Mary's quiet power, the power of resilience, of duty, and of composure in the face of history's most brutal challenges.
After the guns fell silent and the smoke of the First World War drifted across Europe, Britain emerged into an uneasy quiet, exhausted yet alive, its people scarred by grief, loss, and the unshakable memories of a conflict that had touched every village, every household, and every soul. The streets of London were quieter in some ways, yet brimming with the restless energy of a nation that had survived a storm and was now forced to confront the uncertain calm that followed. Mary, the Queen, had witnessed this transformation firsthand, not as a distant figure behind the gilded gates of palaces, but as an attentive, deliberate observer who understood that survival, both of the monarchy and of the nation, depended upon subtlety, intelligence, and unwavering awareness. She had seen young men return from battle with bodies broken, minds shattered, and spirits tested beyond comprehension, and she had felt the silent weight of their suffering press upon her shoulders. She had walked among widows and orphans, women who had been left to shoulder both grief and responsibility, and she had noted in every step, every glance, every whispered lament, that Britain's society was changing in ways that could not be reversed. The old hierarchies, the unquestioned privileges of aristocracy and royalty, the unquestioned reverence for tradition, all of it had been tempered, tested, and in some ways broken by the experiences of total war. The monarchy, Mary realized with unerring clarity, could not remain static. It could not cling to the old forms and expect to endure. And yet it could not abandon its essence, its dignity, its moral authority. For to do so would be to dissolve the very foundation upon which the nation looked to its crown for stability. Mary approached this delicate balance with a quiet yet formidable intelligence. She understood that monarchy was no longer simply a matter of lineage, ritual, and pageantry. It was now a living institution, vulnerable to the perceptions, expectations, and judgments of an increasingly skeptical public. The population had tasted both loss and empowerment during the war years. Soldiers returned with a knowledge that death was impartial and that privilege did not insulate anyone from suffering. Women, who had taken on responsibilities previously denied to them, had discovered competence, resilience, and the capability to shape the country's labor and social systems. The working class had endured privations, rationing, and the bureaucracies of wartime governance. They had emerged with a stronger voice, a willingness to question, and a demand that Britain evolve to reflect the society it now truly was. And Mary, ever perceptive, grasped that the crown could not simply continue in ceremonial splendor, untouched by the winds of change. To survive, the monarchy had to learn the art of subtle adaptation, of bending enough to remain relevant while holding firm enough to preserve its dignity. The first step in this careful evolution was the modernization of court protocols, a task that Mary approached with the precision of a scholar and the intuition of a seasoned diplomat. Where once every interaction at court had been formal to the point of rigidity, she began to encourage an approach that retained decorum but allowed for a human, approachable quality to emerge. She recognized that the public had witnessed the realities of leadership during wartime, the suffering, the sacrifice, the tireless labor, and that the monarchy could no longer appear aloof or inaccessible. Yet she also knew that excessive informality could undermine authority, erode the mystique that underpinned the monarchy's moral power, and signal instability to those both within Britain and across Europe. It was a narrow path, a tightrope walked upon the edge of history, and Mary traversed it with the steady poise that had characterized her entire life. She advised on audience arrangements, social protocols, and ceremonial procedures, refining them so that they communicated dignity while subtly acknowledging the changing expectations of a nation that had survived total war. Every gesture, every rule, every element of etiquette became a tool, carefully calibrated to preserve authority without alienating the public. Public engagements became another domain in which Mary exercised both judgment and foresight. She recognized that visibility, conducted with intelligence and restraint, was essential for the monarchy's survival. The Queen could no longer remain an enigmatic figure, glimpsed only during ceremonial occasions. She needed to demonstrate empathy, attentiveness, and engagement with the realities of modern life. Mary approached these appearances not as performances, but as deliberate acts of service, designed to reassure, to inspire confidence, and to foster a sense of shared experience. She visited hospitals, schools, factories, and community centers, listening attentively, responding thoughtfully, and observing meticulously. In every interaction, she displayed a quiet empathy, a recognition of the struggles endured by ordinary citizens, and a commitment to ensuring that the crown was aligned with the people it symbolized. Her engagement was neither performative nor ostentatious. It was precise, meaningful, and rooted in a deep understanding that survival required connection without compromising dignity.
In tandem with public appearances, Mary embraced the technological innovations that were beginning to reshape the world. The radio, a device that had barely existed during her youth, became a powerful tool for bridging the gap between monarchy and populace. Mary understood intuitively that the spoken word carried authority in ways that ceremonies and print alone could not achieve. She encouraged the use of broadcasts to communicate messages of reassurance, to mark significant national events, and to foster a sense of unity during periods of social tension or economic difficulty. The challenge was immense. Sound carried nuances that could betray insecurity, hesitation, or emotion unmeasured. And yet, when wielded skillfully, it could reinforce the monarchy's relevance and presence. Mary approached this new medium with the same diligence she had applied to every other aspect of her life, rehearsing speeches, perfecting enunciation, and ensuring that each broadcast reflected the solemnity and stability expected of a queen. In doing so, she transformed technology into an extension of monarchy itself, a bridge between centuries-old tradition and the emerging realities of a modern, interconnected society. Social attitudes were shifting, and Mary was acutely aware of the delicate interplay between authority and approachability. The horrors of war had exposed the vulnerabilities of both common citizens and elite families alike. Rationing, loss, and shared hardship had democratized suffering in a way that no one had previously experienced. The public no longer accepted unquestioned privilege. They demanded moral integrity, visible service, and the demonstration of empathy. The monarchy, Mary realized, needed to reflect these evolving values without abandoning the dignity and continuity that gave it legitimacy. She understood that bending too far could be interpreted as weakness, while refusing to adapt at all could be perceived as irrelevance or arrogance. Every decision, every public gesture, every aspect of courtly presentation was carefully calculated to navigate this delicate balance. Mary's interventions, though often invisible to the general public, reshaped the institution subtly yet profoundly, allowing it to survive in a society increasingly skeptical of hierarchy and inherited authority. Every decision, every public gesture, every aspect of courtly presentation was carefully calculated to navigate this delicate balance. Mary's interventions, though often invisible to the general public, reshaped the institution subtly yet profoundly, allowing it to survive in a society increasingly skeptical of hierarchy and inherited authority. Mary also acted as a quiet arbiter within the royal family itself, guiding her husband and children through the intricacies of modern expectations. She recognized that George's natural reserve, combined with the weight of kingship, required careful management in both public and private spheres. She counseled on the tone of speeches, the selection of engagements, and the presentation of the family to the nation, balancing tradition with adaptation. Her influence extended to the upbringing of the younger generation, instilling in them the values of discretion, service, and awareness of public perception. She understood that the monarchy's survival not only on immediate responses to social change, but also on the cultivation of heirs capable of navigating the challenges of a society increasingly defined by democratic ideals, technological transformation, and social mobility.
The interwar years were also a period of intense geopolitical uncertainty. And Mary approached these challenges with the same meticulous attention that had defined her approach to domestic affairs. She monitored developments across Europe, observing the fragile reconstruction of post-war societies, the rise of new political movements, and the shifting balance of power. She was acutely aware that the monarchy's symbolic authority could be undermined by international instability, and that public confidence at home was inextricably linked to perceptions of national security abroad. Mary's counsel to the king was often understated yet influential, emphasizing prudence, preparation, and the need to project both strength and empathy. Her understanding of history, diplomacy, and human behavior allowed her to anticipate challenges before they became crises, guiding the monarchy through a precarious period with a steady hand. Economic pressures, too, required delicate navigation. Britain faced the dual burdens of post-war reconstruction and the global financial volatility that would culminate in the Great Depression. Mary understood that the visibility and behavior of the monarchy could either exacerbate public anxiety or provide reassurance. She advised on charitable initiatives, public works, and ceremonial appearances that emphasized solidarity with the population. She championed projects that highlighted the monarchy's commitment to national well-being without appearing self-serving. Her careful orchestration of these efforts reinforced the perception of the crown as a stabilizing institution, one that honored tradition while demonstrating responsiveness to contemporary social realities. Cultural and technological changes during the interwar years also demanded adaptation. Mary understood that the expansion of mass media, including newspapers, cinema, and radio, transformed public engagement with monarchy. The Queen recognized that maintaining authority in this new environment required not only discretion and poise, but also a willingness to engage selectively with emerging platforms. She oversaw photographic sessions, public appearances, and broadcasts with exacting attention to detail, ensuring that every image, every word, and every gesture reinforced the values of continuity, dignity, and service. Her engagement with modern media was measured, never gratuitous, yet profoundly effective in projecting a monarchy that could coexist with a rapidly changing society. Despite the enormous pressures, Mary never relinquished her role as guardian of tradition. She maintained the ceremonial rituals, the protocols, and the symbols that connected contemporary Britain to centuries of history. Yet she did so in a way that was neither rigid nor outdated. Every ceremony, every public event, every interaction with citizens was imbued with intentionality, reflecting a monarchy that respected its past while acknowledging the evolving present. Mary's ability to walk this narrow path, balancing continuity with adaptation, became the defining feature of her queenship during the interwar years. Through all these transformations, Mary's personal discipline remained extraordinary. She managed her household with meticulous attention, ensuring that every detail reflected both historical continuity and contemporary relevance. She oversaw the training of staff, the presentation of official residences, and the coordination of royal engagements with the precision of a general orchestrating a campaign. Her personal habits, early rising, careful attention to correspondence, and rigorous preparation for every engagement served as both a model and a mechanism for managing the increasingly complex demands placed upon the monarchy. Her life became a seamless integration of public duty, private discipline, and strategic foresight, embodying the principles that would sustain the institution through a volatile era. Mary's influence extended beyond mere optics. She shaped the very philosophy of monarchy in a period of profound social change. She demonstrated that the crown could evolve without collapsing, that symbolism could coexist with substance, and that tradition could be adapted without sacrificing legitimacy. Her approach combined historical awareness, moral authority, and practical acumen, creating a template for a modern monarchy capable of surviving the pressures of the 20th century. She became, in essence, the silent architect of the institution's resilience, building structures of stability and legitimacy that would endure long after her reign and after the tumult of interwar Europe. As Britain navigated the complexities of post-war reconstruction, shifting social norms, and global uncertainty, Mary's quiet guidance provided the monarchy with a steadying hand. Her attention to public perception, her embrace of modern technology, her careful adaptation of tradition, and her personal discipline coalesced into a form of leadership that was subtle yet immensely effective. She ensured that the monarchy remained a source of continuity and reassurance, even as society around it questioned hierarchy, privilege, and inherited authority. Through her actions, she demonstrated that survival required both flexibility and restraint, courage and prudence, innovation and respect for history. In doing so, she secured the monarchy's place in a changing world and established a legacy of adaptability, dignity, and service that would define the institution for generations to come. Nothing, however, could have prepared Mary for the profound personal and dynastic upheaval that would arrive in 1936, a year that would test her resilience, her sense of duty, and the very essence of the monarchy she had devoted her life to preserving. By then, she had weathered 2 world wars, guided her husband through the trials of kingship, shepherded her children through the perils of expectation and public scrutiny, and witnessed the empire itself transform under pressures of modernity, social change, and the aftermath of conflict. Yet the crisis that emerged that year was unlike any she had faced before, for it struck at the intersection of private heartbreak and public catastrophe. Her eldest son, David, known formally as King Edward VIII, but called David by those who loved him, announced with a clarity and determination that shook the foundations of royal life that he intended to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee whose presence in European aristocracy was unprecedented. The announcement was not a simple matter of romance. It was a challenge to tradition, a defiance of the sacred obligations that defined kingship, and a spark that ignited political, religious, and social turmoil across the empire. Mary understood immediately that the stakes were monumental. The government, steeped in the prudence of constitutional duty, opposed the marriage with unwavering resolve. To permit a king to wed a woman who had been divorced twice was, in the eyes of both ministers and church authorities, an act that could unravel the moral and legal foundations of the monarchy. The Church of England, to which both monarch and people were bound, condemned the union on the grounds that it violated canon law and public expectation, threatening the sanctity of marriage and the spiritual authority of the crown. Across the empire, newspapers, political analysts, and ordinary citizens debated with fervor, projecting anxiety, disbelief, and moral outrage onto a situation that transcended personal preference. Mary, always attuned to the currents of public opinion and the fragility of perception, recognized that her son's choice, if realized, could imperil the monarchy itself, undermining the institution she had spent decades fortifying. Her private grief, however, was inseparable from this public crisis. The emotional complexity for Mary was immense. She had loved David from the moment he was born, marveling at his vivacity, intelligence, and charm, even while recognizing the impulsiveness and emotional volatility that she believed required careful guidance. She had tried over the years to temper his restlessness, to instill in him a sense of duty and the discipline essential for a monarch. Yet she also knew deep within that David's passions were difficult to restrain. He had always been drawn to that which defied convention, to the allure of novelty, to personal happiness over obligation, and Mary had feared, but never fully anticipated, that he might one day place personal desire above the crown itself. When the news of his engagement to Wallis Simpson became clear, that fear was realized in the most devastating possible form. The son she had nurtured, the heir she had hoped would embody both charisma and responsibility, was now poised to imperil the institution she had worked tirelessly to protect. Her private grief, however, was inseparable from this public crisis. The emotional complexity for Mary was immense. She had loved David from the moment he was born, marveling at his vivacity, intelligence, and charm, even while recognizing the impulsiveness and emotional volatility that she believed required careful guidance. She had tried over the years to temper his restlessness, to instill in him a sense of duty and the discipline essential for a monarch. Yet she also knew deep within that David's passions were difficult to restrain. He had always been drawn to that which defied convention, to the allure of novelty, to personal happiness over obligation, and Mary had feared, but never fully anticipated, that he might one day place personal desire above the crown itself. When the news of his engagement to Wallis Simpson became clear, that fear was realized in the most devastating possible form. The son she had nurtured, the heir she had hoped would embody both charisma and responsibility, was now poised to imperil the institution she had worked tirelessly to protect. Her private grief, however, was inseparable from this public crisis.
Mary's grief was profound but contained. Unlike the ordinary human expression of sorrow, which might manifest as tears, raised voice, or visible collapse, Mary internalized her anguish. Her understanding of duty had long dictated that a monarch or a queen consort must remain composed under all circumstances, that personal feelings must be subordinated to the welfare of the crown. In private, she wrestled with heartbreak, the gnawing ache of betrayal, and the knowledge that the monarchy's stability teetered on a knife edge. But she did not allow her sorrow to leak into public view. She maintained her composure in audience chambers, in public engagements, in family gatherings, and in the quiet moments where advisors, courtiers, and even her own children could witness the steadiness that became, in that turbulent year, her defining attribute. Duty above self, the crown above the individual. These were not mere maxims to Mary. They were the principles by which she had lived for decades, and in 1936, they were tested as never before. The political machinery around her churned with urgency. Ministers, wary of a constitutional crisis, attempted every negotiation, every compromise, and every argument to avert catastrophe. They explained to Mary and to the king himself the impossible predicament in which the monarchy now found itself. Permitting Edward to marry Wallis Simpson would alienate the church, erode public confidence, and destabilize the empire's perception of moral and legal authority. Respected politicians, legal advisors, and clergy members deliberated for weeks, sometimes daily. Yet the outcome remained uncertain, hinging entirely on the decision of a man both impulsive and emotionally driven. Mary, observing these developments, felt the tension between her dual roles acutely. She was mother, charged with guiding and protecting her child. She was queen, charged with preserving an institution of national significance. She was human, confronted with betrayal and disillusionment. And she was historian, acutely aware of precedent and the fragility of dynastic continuity. Every meeting, every letter, every whispered consultation carried stakes that extended far beyond the private realm. Throughout the crisis, Mary's approach was methodical, restrained, and unwavering. She maintained careful correspondence, offered counsel when appropriate, and positioned herself as both mediator and moral anchor within the family. She recognized that her influence could not coerce Edward, whose personal passions had eclipsed duty, but she could offer guidance, clarity, and the weight of reasoned counsel. She engaged with the king's advisors, navigating the political, legal, and spiritual dimensions of the situation, all while preserving the dignity expected of her office. In moments of private reflection, she allowed herself to contemplate the implications, the potential abdication of a monarch, the elevation of a second son ill-prepared for rule, the possibility of public unrest, and the personal cost of seeing her son choose personal happiness over the institution he had inherited. Yet outwardly, she remained composed, as she had always done, embodying the ethos that had defined her queenship, calm, disciplined, and resolute, even when the storm raged within.
Edward, for all his charm, was unwavering. His affection for Wallis Simpson was immediate, intense, and all-consuming. He valued personal fulfillment over the conventions of kingship, viewing his love as incompatible with restraint. Mary, though pained by his decision, understood his temperament better than anyone else. She knew that he had always prioritized emotion over duty, that he had chafed under the constraints of protocol and expectation, and that his determination to marry Wallis was, to him, a matter of personal necessity. Her maternal heart recoiled at the thought of losing him to scandal, yet she also recognized that confrontation or anger would achieve little. The situation required patience, calculation, and the enduring principle that the monarchy transcended any single individual. Ultimately, Edward's choice became irrevocable. Faced with opposition from the government, the church, and the broader empire, he insisted upon abdication. The decision was historic, a reigning monarch voluntarily relinquishing the throne, an act almost unimaginable in the modern era. Mary, confronted with the reality of Edward's abdication, experienced a mixture of grief, shock, and profound sorrow. Her entire life had been devoted to strengthening the monarchy, ensuring its relevance, stability, and dignity. To witness her eldest son set aside those responsibilities for personal desire was a blow that reverberated to the core of her being. Yet, in true character, she concealed her heartbreak, channeling her energy into support for the next in line, understanding that the survival of the crown depended upon the seamless transition of authority. Her second son, Albert, known within the family as Bertie and destined to become George VI, was thrust into a role for which he had never anticipated being prepared. Shy, stammering, introspective, and deeply insecure, Bertie faced a monumental responsibility. He had lived in the shadow of his older brother, observing David's charisma,
confidence, and social ease, while quietly internalizing the lessons of discipline, restraint, and duty imparted by his mother. Now, unexpectedly, he was called upon to assume the highest office in the land, to bear the weight of public expectation, and to navigate a world increasingly complex, fraught with both domestic challenges and international tension. Mary, ever perceptive, recognized the enormity of the burden placed upon him and resolved to provide both guidance and moral support. Mary's mentorship of Bertie was comprehensive, deliberate, and patient. She addressed not only the ceremonial and constitutional aspects of kingship, but also the emotional and psychological dimensions of leadership. She helped him cultivate the courage to speak publicly, to make decisions under scrutiny, and to embody the stability expected of a monarch during a period of uncertainty. She counseled him on the selection of advisers, the navigation of political crises, and the subtleties of public perception. She reinforced the importance of discipline, of moral consistency, and of measured judgment, qualities she had always valued and exemplified. Through her guidance, Bertie slowly grew into the role thrust upon him, acquiring confidence not through inherited charisma, but through preparation, reflection, and the steady support of a mother who had long understood the complexities of duty.
Meanwhile, Mary maintained her public composure with extraordinary precision. She attended official ceremonies, supported charitable and public initiatives, and projected the dignity and continuity that reassured both the empire and the nation. The abdication, while a profound personal tragedy, did not diminish her public service. Instead, it reinforced her role as a stabilizing presence, a constant amidst upheaval, and a moral compass within a monarchy suddenly tested by unprecedented circumstance. Her example demonstrated that personal grief could coexist with public responsibility, that heartbreak need not compromise duty, and that the continuity of an institution depended upon those willing to subordinate personal emotion to the broader needs of society. The abdication crisis also highlighted Mary's acute understanding of symbolism and perception. She recognized that the monarchy's legitimacy rested not merely on legal structures, but on the public's trust and respect. By maintaining composure, offering guidance, and ensuring a seamless transition to George VI, she reinforced the monarchy's authority, demonstrating that while individual choices could be flawed or impulsive, the institution itself remained resilient. Her actions during this period exemplified a rare combination of emotional intelligence, strategic foresight, and unwavering discipline, qualities that preserved the crown's stability during one of its most perilous moments. Through the crisis, Mary's personal sacrifices were immense, yet invisible to the public eye. She endured the humiliation and sorrow of a son who had chosen personal desire over duty, concealed her heartbreak from the world, and devoted herself entirely to ensuring that the monarchy's continuity was preserved. Her response was not dramatic. It was deliberate, calculated, and principled. She embodied the belief that monarchy was larger than any one individual, that the responsibilities of the crown transcended familial bonds, and that the preservation of national stability required personal endurance. In this, she exemplified the ethos of service and sacrifice that had defined her life, demonstrating that leadership often requires quiet resilience rather than public display. By the end of 1936, Mary had navigated the monarchy through the greatest personal and institutional crisis of her life. Her eldest son had abdicated. The second son had ascended the throne unexpectedly,
and the empire had been spared constitutional and political instability thanks in large part to her guidance, composure, and moral authority. She had confronted heartbreak with dignity, provided mentorship to a hesitant and insecure monarch, and preserved the monarchy's relevance in a rapidly changing world. The abdication crisis, while devastating on a personal level, became a testament to Mary's extraordinary capacity for resilience, her unwavering commitment to duty, and her profound understanding of the delicate balance between private grief and public responsibility. Her role during this tumultuous period reinforced her legacy as a queen whose influence, though often understated, shaped the course of British history and ensured the survival of the monarchy in its most vulnerable hour.
Mary's conduct during the abdication also had enduring implications for her relationship with her family. While Edward's abdication marked a rupture in the traditional line of succession and introduced tensions within the royal household, Mary's measured response facilitated reconciliation, understanding, and continuity. She cultivated an environment in which Bertie could develop confidence, resilience, and authority without being overshadowed by public scandal. Her ability to navigate these complex familial dynamics with discretion, wisdom, and foresight demonstrated not only her mastery of public duty, but also her profound skill as a mother, counselor, and moral anchor. Through this, she exemplified the principle that leadership, particularly within a monarchy, requires balancing the personal and the political, the private and the public, with unwavering integrity. By the conclusion of the crisis, Mary had not only preserved the monarchy's stability, but also shaped its future. George VI, strengthened by her guidance, assumed the responsibilities of kingship with renewed purpose, supported by a mother whose resilience and insight had been instrumental in preparing him for an unexpected and monumental role. The abdication, while a personal catastrophe, became a defining moment in Mary's life, highlighting the depth of her commitment to duty, her capacity for moral leadership, and her unwavering prioritization of the crown over personal sentiment. In the history of the British monarchy, few moments have tested both family and institution as severely, and few figures have navigated such peril with the combination of tact, intelligence, and composure exemplified by Mary of Teck. When Britain entered the Second World War in September of 1939, the nation braced itself for a conflict unlike any it had faced in living memory. Cities would burn, skies would roar with the engines of warplanes, and the lives of ordinary citizens would be transformed forever. The shadow of the previous global conflict still lingered, a ghostly reminder of the horrors humanity had witnessed. And yet, even in the face of such imminent catastrophe, Mary, Queen Consort, now 72 years old, refused to retreat into safety or obscurity. Age and status, she believed, could never excuse shirking duty, and her understanding of leadership had long been forged in the crucible of personal loss, public expectation, and 2 world wars' worth of trials. Her life, up to that point, had been one of unyielding discipline, of steadfast service, and of an almost sacred commitment to the monarchy and to the people of Britain. Now, in the darkest hours before and during the Blitz, that commitment would be tested once more, as bombs rained down over London and the country itself teetered on the brink of despair. Mary's approach to the war was deliberate and unwavering. From the earliest days, she immersed herself in the realities of the conflict, refusing the comfort of distance or the illusion of safety that her station could have provided. She traveled tirelessly across the country, visiting bombed neighborhoods where families huddled in shelters, surveying military bases where young men prepared to fight in foreign lands, and observing munitions factories where workers labored long hours to produce the weapons that would sustain the nation's defense. She visited refugee centers where children displaced from cities sought warmth, nourishment, and protection from the war that had uprooted their lives. At every stop, Mary listened, observed, and engaged with a quiet intensity. Her presence was neither performative nor ceremonial. It was purposeful, grounded in a profound sense of moral duty and an understanding that the monarchy's legitimacy was inseparable from its engagement with the people it represented. Even as the Blitz descended upon London in late 1940, Mary remained firmly in the city, despite repeated suggestions that she evacuate to the countryside or abroad for her own safety. Government officials, advisors, and even family members feared for her well-being. After all, she was elderly by any standard, and the Luftwaffe's relentless bombing campaigns spared no one. Yet, Mary's response was resolute. The monarchy could not be insulated from the suffering of the nation. She believed that the crown, as a symbol of unity, resilience, and continuity, must share in the dangers endured by the people. To abandon the city would have been a betrayal of that principle, a visible retreat that could have undermined public morale at the moment when it was most fragile. And so, as incendiary bombs rained over rooftops, as smoke and fire filled the air, and as sirens wailed with terrifying frequency, Mary continued her schedule, moving through the streets and institutions of London with calm composure, projecting stability in a world suddenly unmoored. Her visits were carefully considered, yet deeply human in their effect. She walked among the rubble of bombed homes, observing the courage of families who refused to be broken by loss, taking note of the resourcefulness of civilians who rebuilt what had been destroyed with their own hands, and offering words of comfort where appropriate, never overstaying her welcome, but always present enough to be a source of reassurance. She visited hospitals where the wounded were treated, attending not just to the physical needs of the soldiers and civilians, but to their emotional well-being as well. She listened to stories of survival and suffering with a focus that conveyed both empathy and strength, a combination that inspired confidence among those who encountered her. Nurses, medics, and volunteers found in Mary a calm observer who understood the gravity of their work and the importance of sustaining hope. Her presence reinforced a vital truth, that leadership was not merely ceremonial or symbolic, but grounded in action, compassion, and moral courage. Mary's personal discipline was extraordinary. Even amidst the chaos of war, she adhered to her long-established routines, rising early, maintaining her correspondence, and attending to the affairs of the royal household with meticulous attention. Every engagement was planned, every journey through bombed neighborhoods carefully timed, and every interaction executed with precision. She did not complain, she did not flinch, she did not allow fear to enter the public sphere. Her strength was quiet but palpable, a constant thread that ran through the wartime experience of Britain's population, reinforcing the notion that the monarchy could endure, that stability could coexist with crisis, and that resilience was a quality not merely expected but embodied at the highest levels of national life. Her influence extended beyond the streets of London. She took an active interest in the morale of troops stationed across the country, visiting military installations and observing training exercises. She attended war councils in a supportive capacity, listened attentively to reports of strategy and logistics, and offered guidance grounded in her decades of experience in public life. Mary understood that the war effort was not solely fought on battlefields. It was sustained through the courage, discipline, and resilience of both military personnel and civilians. By demonstrating her own endurance, she modeled the very qualities that the nation needed to survive and ultimately triumph. As the months progressed, Mary's constancy became a cornerstone of public reassurance. Newspapers reported her visits, radio broadcasts detailed her appearances, and even in informal discussions, the presence of the Queen Consort became a symbol of hope. She embodied the continuity of the monarchy at a moment when uncertainty threatened every institution. While bombs fell over London, while cities across Britain were reduced to rubble, while Europe itself seemed to collapse under the inexorable advance of fascism, Mary of Teck continued with her schedule, navigating air raids, debris-strewn streets, and the ever-present threat of death with calm efficiency. Civilians and soldiers alike drew strength from her example. She was a living testament to the idea that dignity and courage could coexist, that fear could be managed without denial, and that the responsibilities of leadership required courage both visible and unspoken. Her son, King George VI, was the embodiment of quiet, determined leadership during this period, and Mary's support was invaluable. She understood both his strengths and vulnerabilities, providing counsel, reassurance, and guidance without overshadowing his authority. She recognized that he bore the immense burden of guiding a nation through the most perilous period in its history, and she reinforced his position by modeling stability herself, ensuring that the public perceived a monarchy united, competent, and resilient. Her presence allowed him to lead with confidence, knowing that his mother's judgment and experience formed a protective and stabilizing influence behind the scenes. Mary also watched her granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth, begin to take on public duties in response to the wartime demands placed upon the royal family. Elizabeth, still young, faced responsibilities that required both maturity and composure beyond her years, and Mary provided mentorship, guidance, and example. She demonstrated how to navigate public appearances, engage with civilians and military personnel, and embody the resilience required of royalty during wartime. Through her mentorship, she ensured that the next generation of the monarchy was prepared to maintain continuity and uphold the institution's dignity even under the most challenging circumstances. Throughout the war, Mary's understanding of symbolism and perception remained as acute as ever. She recognized that the monarchy's relevance and authority were dependent upon the public's perception of its engagement, courage, and moral fortitude. Her refusal to evacuate, her visits to bombed neighborhoods, her engagement with military personnel, and her mentorship of the younger generation all served to reinforce the monarchy's image as a stabilizing and enduring institution. Every action, every decision, every gesture was deliberate, imbued with the understanding that leadership was performed not just through words or decrees, but through presence, example, and moral consistency. Mary's composure was also a psychological bulwark for the nation. In a time when fear, uncertainty, and destruction threatened to overwhelm the population, her calm, almost immovable presence served as a stabilizing force. Civilians walking past bombed buildings, hearing the distant roar of planes and feeling the tremors of distant explosions, could take solace in the knowledge that the monarchy, personified by Mary, remained steadfast. Her example demonstrated that courage was not always loud or dramatic, but often quiet, disciplined, and unwavering. This quality resonated deeply with a population that needed reassurance, hope, and a sense of continuity amidst chaos. Mary's wartime efforts extended beyond visible public engagement. She took an interest in charitable organizations that supported war relief, the care of children orphaned or displaced by bombing campaigns, and the rehabilitation of injured soldiers. She monitored the distribution of aid, ensured that resources were directed where they were most needed, and leveraged her influence to sustain morale both among civilians and within the royal household. Her attention to detail, strategic understanding of public perception, and ability to act decisively under pressure ensured that the monarchy contributed meaningfully to the national war effort, not merely as a symbolic presence, but as an active agent of social and moral cohesion. Even as Europe descended further into conflict, with nations occupied, governments displaced, and civilians subjected to unimaginable horrors, Mary's focus never wavered. She understood that the war was fought not only on distant battlefields, but also within the hearts and minds of the population. Her role was to embody resilience, to reassure the fearful, to model courage, and to ensure that the monarchy remained relevant and respected in a rapidly changing world. Through her actions, she demonstrated that the survival of institutions during times of crisis depended as much upon the moral authority and example of their leaders as upon legal structures, armies, or strategies. Mary's influence during the Second World War was thus both profound and multifaceted. She was a stabilizing public presence, a mentor to the younger generation of royalty, a guide and counselor to King George VI, and a symbol of continuity in a nation confronted with unprecedented peril. She embodied the principles that had defined her life: discipline, composure, moral clarity, and unwavering commitment to duty. Through her example, the monarchy survived one of its greatest existential threats, its authority preserved, its relevance affirmed, and its future secured. By the end of the war, Mary's legacy was clear. She had navigated Britain's monarchy through a period of unparalleled danger and uncertainty, demonstrating that leadership could be both quiet and monumental. Her composure, courage, and dedication had provided reassurance to millions, reinforced the legitimacy of the crown, and prepared the next generation of royalty for the responsibilities they would inherit. While cities lay in ruins, families mourned, and Europe struggled to recover, Mary of Teck remained a steadfast figure, an unyielding presence who had ensured that the monarchy survived yet again, not by mere tradition, but through active, disciplined, and compassionate engagement. In the history of the British monarchy, few periods tested its resilience more rigorously than the Second World War, and few figures embodied the fortitude, wisdom, and enduring moral authority necessary to preserve it as Mary did. Her life during those years became a testament to the power of resilience, the necessity of duty, and the profound impact of personal example. She was not a monarch in her own right, yet her influence shaped the survival and continuity of the crown in ways that would be felt for decades. While bombs fell, cities burned, and the continent convulsed under the weight of war, Mary of Teck remained the calm, composed, guiding presence upon which the monarchy and, by extension, the nation could rely.
Her legacy during the Second World War was one of quiet heroism, unwavering duty, and the assurance that even in the darkest hours, stability, courage, and continuity could endure. Her life during those years became a testament to the power of resilience, the necessity of duty, and the profound impact of personal example. She was not a monarch in her own right, yet her influence shaped the survival and continuity of the crown in ways that would be felt for decades. While bombs fell, cities burned, and the continent convulsed under the weight of war, Mary of Teck remained the calm, composed, guiding presence upon which the monarchy and, by extension, the nation could rely. Her legacy during the Second World War was one of quiet heroism, unwavering duty, and the assurance that even in the darkest hours, stability, courage, and continuity could endure.
After the Second World War, Britain emerged into a landscape both familiar and irrevocably changed. The devastation of the past decade left scars on cities, on families, and on the very consciousness of the nation. Yet from that destruction arose resilience, determination, and a recognition that the world itself had shifted in ways that could not be reversed. Empires were dissolving, colonial dominions were asserting independence, and the political landscape was being reshaped by movements that challenged tradition and demanded adaptation. In the midst of these sweeping transformations, Mary of Teck, now in her 80s, remained a steadfast observer and guardian of the institution she had devoted her life to preserving. Though her body had grown frail and her health increasingly delicate, her mind remained sharp, her judgment clear, and her understanding of duty unshakable. She was, as always, acutely aware that her role was not merely to survive, but to ensure that the monarchy itself endured, intact, respected, and prepared for the uncertainties of the future. Mary's focus in these years was as much personal as it was institutional. She had watched the empire she had known since childhood shift under the pressures of modernity, political upheaval, and the unavoidable march of history. The grandeur of coronations, the solemnity of official ceremonies, and the meticulous precision of court life, all the elements that had defined her early years as Queen Consort, now existed in a world increasingly shaped by mass media, popular scrutiny, and social transformation. Yet Mary approached this new era not with resistance, but with careful discernment, understanding that survival required adaptation without compromise. Her life had been a testament to the delicate art of balancing tradition with progress, and she applied those lessons with patient dedication during these final years, quietly shaping the future of the monarchy from behind the scenes. A central focus of her attention during this period was Princess Elizabeth, the young granddaughter whose destiny was inescapably entwined with the crown. Mary, recognizing both the weight of responsibility that Elizabeth would inherit and the trials that awaited her, took the young princess under her careful tutelage. She guided Elizabeth not only in the mechanics of royal duty, how to address courtiers, how to navigate formal audiences, how to manage public appearances, but also in the subtler, immeasurable qualities that defined effective monarchy. The cultivation of poise, the exercise of discretion, the understanding of public perception, and the nurturing of empathy for those whom she would serve. Mary's approach was neither authoritarian nor casual. It was deliberate, precise, and infused with the wisdom of a life spent observing the interplay between personal character, public expectation, and the enduring demands of leadership. She imparted lessons drawn from decades of experience, the importance of listening before speaking, of observing before acting, and of carrying oneself in a manner that projected both dignity and approachability. Every gesture, every word, every expression was subject to subtle instruction, for Mary knew that the future of the monarchy depended upon Elizabeth's ability to embody both continuity and relevance in a rapidly changing world. During these years, Mary's own health was a constant concern. The stresses of decades, personal loss, wartime responsibilities, the emotional strain of guiding her children through turbulent reigns, and the unrelenting demands of public duty had taken their toll. Her movements became slower, her presence more measured, yet her mental acuity and awareness of courtly and national affairs remained formidable. Courtiers, aides, and family members observed her with a mixture of awe and reverence, understanding that despite her physical frailty, her influence was undiminished. Mary had long mastered the art of exercising authority subtly, shaping outcomes through counsel, example, and judicious intervention rather than overt action. In her final years, she employed this skill to ensure that Elizabeth's education, exposure, and preparation were thorough, nuanced, and precisely tailored to meet the unique challenges of post-war monarchy. Mary also faced profound personal sorrow during this period. She had already endured the deaths of her beloved husband, King George V, and her youngest sons, whose lives had been marked by both privilege and tragedy. Now, as George VI, her second son, carried the burdens of kingship through a world at war and into the precarious peace that followed, Mary confronted the inevitability of mortality not only in the abstract sense, but in the intimate knowledge that even the most capable monarchs were mortal. When George VI fell gravely ill in the early 1950s, Mary's private anguish was immense. She had spent decades providing him guidance, reassurance, and the moral scaffolding upon which his reign was built. He had survived the abdication crisis, guided the nation through a global conflict, and restored confidence in a monarchy that could have faltered under the weight of public scrutiny and geopolitical turmoil. To witness his health decline, to sense the looming reality that the crown would soon pass to Elizabeth, was a deeply personal trial for Mary, blending grief with anticipation, loss with the hope of continuity. Her days during this period were often spent in reflection, interspersed with careful attention to the affairs of the household and the court. She maintained correspondence, received visitors, and engaged with matters of charity and public engagement insofar as her health permitted. Yet much of her focus was inward, dedicated to ensuring that Elizabeth was not only prepared for the public responsibilities she would inherit, but also equipped with the emotional resilience, moral clarity, and intellectual discernment necessary to sustain a monarchy in a rapidly evolving world. Mary's instruction encompassed the practicalities of governance, the symbolism of tradition, and the subtleties of personal comportment, instilling in Elizabeth the understanding that leadership was as much a moral and psychological endeavor as it was ceremonial or constitutional.
Mary's influence extended even to the shaping of national perception. Though no longer as visible as she had been during wartime, her reputation for dignity, discipline, and unwavering commitment continued to resonate with both the public and the court. Stories of her composure during crises, her tireless public service, and her guidance of George VI were widely circulated, reinforcing the image of a monarchy defined by continuity, moral authority, and careful stewardship. Her presence, even in diminished health, acted as a stabilizing influence, a reminder that the crown was an enduring institution capable of weathering the vicissitudes of both history and human frailty. As the inevitability of George VI's passing approached, Mary prepared herself with the same deliberate care that had characterized her entire life. She understood that the transition to Elizabeth's reign would be fraught with emotional and practical challenges. She recognized that her granddaughter would face a world vastly different from the one Mary had known in her youth. A world shaped by post-war reconstruction, decolonization, and the accelerating pace of technological and social change. Yet Mary's confidence in Elizabeth's capacity to rise to these challenges was rooted in the careful preparation she had overseen, the guidance she had provided, and the example she had set throughout a lifetime of service. When George VI died in 1952, Mary's grief was profound. She had lost not only a son, but a king who had embodied the resilience, moral fortitude, and dedication that she had long sought to instill. Her sorrow was compounded by the knowledge that her role as the elder stateswoman of the royal family would come to an end in the sense of active influence, and that Elizabeth, now Queen, would assume responsibilities previously shared or guided by Mary's counsel. Yet even in this moment of personal heartbreak, Mary's composure remained intact. She continued to embody the principles that had defined her life: dignity, steadfastness, and an unwavering prioritization of duty over personal sentiment. In the months following George VI's death, Mary's health declined rapidly. She was frail, her energy diminished, and her body increasingly constrained by the cumulative toll of age, illness, and decades of unrelenting service. Yet she remained mentally alert, aware of the historic significance of the events unfolding around her, and emotionally invested in the continuation of the dynasty she had spent her life protecting. She witnessed Elizabeth's first steps as monarch, the careful orchestration of official ceremonies, and the preparation for a coronation that would symbolize both continuity and renewal. In these final moments, Mary's attention was focused less on her own frailty and more on the assurance that the crown and the institution it represented would endure.
Mary of Teck passed away on March 24, 1953, at the age of 85. Her death came mere months before Elizabeth II's coronation, yet she had lived long enough to witness the transition of power, the ascension of the granddaughter she had prepared with meticulous care, and the survival of the monarchy through crises that had defined her lifetime. In her final years, Mary had demonstrated the profound endurance of duty, the quiet strength of moral authority, and the essential balance of personal sacrifice and institutional preservation. She had guided her family, shaped public perception, and ensured that the crown remained relevant, respected, and prepared for the challenges of a new era. Mary's passing marked the end of an era, yet it was also a testament to the longevity of influence, the enduring impact of disciplined leadership, and the capacity of a single individual to shape history not only through public acts, but through the careful, deliberate cultivation of those who would follow.
In her life's final chapter, she embodied the principles that had sustained her through decades of personal loss, public scrutiny, and global upheaval. Resilience in the face of adversity, unwavering commitment to duty, and a profound understanding that monarchy, while symbolically eternal, depends upon the wisdom, foresight, and moral fortitude of those who inhabit it. Her legacy, carried forward in the reign of Elizabeth II, stood as a testament to a life lived in service, to the preservation of tradition tempered by adaptation, and to the enduring strength of a crown guided by quiet yet formidable wisdom.
Mary of Teck, Queen Consort of George V and grandmother to Elizabeth II, occupied a unique and enduring place in the history of the British monarchy, a position defined not by flamboyant charisma, public adoration, or dramatic gestures of personality, but by something quieter, steadier, and far more enduring: reliability. Unlike later figures such as Diana, Princess of Wales, who captured the public imagination with accessibility, emotion, and personal warmth, or Elizabeth II, whose reign would be marked by the careful cultivation of duty over intimacy, Mary's influence was subtle, often imperceptible to those outside the corridors of power, yet foundational in shaping the trajectory of the monarchy. Her contribution was measured not in spectacle or sensation, but in the careful cultivation of stability, discipline, and continuity. She understood that the monarchy, unlike a mere political institution, derived its power and legitimacy from a combination of tradition, moral authority, and the perception of permanence. To safeguard this required an almost obsessive devotion to duty, a capacity for foresight, and the discipline to subordinate personal inclination to institutional necessity. Throughout her life, she embodied these qualities with extraordinary fidelity, navigating crises, wars, and personal loss, while ensuring that the monarchy remained unbroken, respected, and prepared for the evolving challenges of the 20th century. Mary's life spanned a period of unprecedented upheaval in Europe and the world. Born in 1867 into the Teck family, minor German nobility, she entered the British royal family through her marriage to George V, a union that would define both her personal life and her public legacy. From the outset, she exhibited an acute understanding of the delicate balance required of a queen consort: to support the king, to guide her children, and to maintain the dignity and stability of the monarchy itself. She recognized that her personal desires, emotions, or ambitions were subordinate to the obligations of her station, and she embraced this reality with a sense of purpose that would characterize every aspect of her life. Unlike more theatrical or emotionally expressive public figures, Mary's presence was steady, her judgment measured, and her influence quiet yet pervasive. In this, she embodied a rare form of power: the ability to shape outcomes not through overt action or public display, but through consistent, disciplined, and principled engagement over decades. Mary's tenure as Queen Consort coincided with the tumultuous reign of her husband, George V, whose own leadership was tested by global upheaval, social transformation, and the challenges of maintaining imperial authority in a rapidly changing world. She supported him through crises, both personal and political, offering counsel, discretion, and moral clarity when the monarchy's legitimacy was questioned or threatened. The First World War tested her resilience and capacity for public service in ways that few could have anticipated. As cities across Europe were ravaged, as soldiers and civilians suffered unimaginable loss, and as the very notion of monarchy faced scrutiny under the pressures of social and political transformation, Mary's composure became a stabilizing force. She understood that her role was not merely ceremonial, it was symbolic, moral, and, in practical terms, essential to sustaining public confidence. Through her actions, visiting hospitals, attending military ceremonies, engaging with charitable initiatives, and guiding the royal household, she projected a calm, disciplined presence that reassured a population living under the shadow of catastrophe. Her steadiness, at a time when the world seemed chaotic and unstable, reinforced the legitimacy of the crown and demonstrated the profound impact of disciplined, thoughtful, and consistent leadership. In addition to her wartime efforts, Mary's influence extended deeply into the shaping of her children, whose future roles would define the monarchy for generations. She nurtured, advised, and, when necessary, disciplined them with an understanding that personal development, character formation, and moral education were inseparable from the responsibilities of royal life. She recognized the dangers posed by temperament untempered by duty, charm unaccompanied by judgment, and personal desire unaligned with institutional obligation. The abdication crisis of 1936, in which her eldest son, Edward VIII, chose personal romance over the crown, was a profound test of her abilities as both mother and guardian of the monarchy. Though the decision caused immense personal pain, Mary's response was emblematic of her lifelong approach. She subordinated grief to duty, offered guidance and counsel without recrimination, and worked tirelessly to stabilize the succession, ensuring that her second son, George VI, assumed the throne with the moral and institutional support necessary to preserve continuity. Her intervention, subtle yet critical, exemplified the way in which her steady influence shaped the course of the monarchy during moments of existential risk. Mary's understanding of the interplay between tradition and modernity was particularly evident during these crises. She recognized that the monarchy's survival depended upon its ability to maintain continuity while adapting to the demands of an evolving society. In the wake of Edward's abdication, she provided counsel, mentorship, and reassurance, ensuring that George VI could navigate both the constitutional challenges of his reign and the emotional weight of leading a nation still recovering from economic depression and the lingering trauma of the First World War. Mary's approach was patient and deliberate. She cultivated resilience in her children, reinforced the values of discipline and duty, and ensured that the monarchy remained anchored in principles that could withstand the pressures of both personal desire and public scrutiny. Her ability to mediate between tradition and the imperatives of contemporary governance exemplified a form of leadership that was at once subtle, strategic, and morally grounded, reinforcing her status as an indispensable figure in the preservation of the British crown. Her contributions during the Second World War further solidified her legacy as a stabilizing, guiding force. Even in advanced age, Mary refused to retreat from public life or ceremonial responsibility, understanding that the monarchy's authority depended upon visibility, continuity, and engagement with a nation under siege.
She visited bombed neighborhoods, observed military operations, supported charitable institutions, and provided moral guidance to both George VI and the young Princess Elizabeth, future queen. Her presence during the Blitz and throughout the war projected resilience and calm, reassuring civilians and soldiers alike that the crown, like the nation itself, could endure even under the most severe strain. These actions were not performative, but deliberate. They reflected a sophisticated understanding of symbolism, public perception, and the moral responsibilities inherent in her station. Mary's influence ensured that the monarchy maintained relevance, authority, and moral authority, even amid unprecedented existential threats. Mary's enduring legacy is also found in her preparation of the next generation of royalty. She recognized that the stability of the monarchy depended upon careful succession planning, rigorous preparation, and the cultivation of personal qualities necessary for effective leadership. She mentored Princess Elizabeth and other younger family members in the subtleties of public duty, personal comportment, and moral responsibility. Her guidance extended beyond ceremonial instruction, encompassing the development of resilience, emotional intelligence, and judgment, qualities that would enable Elizabeth to assume the throne with confidence, wisdom, and moral authority. Through this mentorship, Mary ensured that the monarchy would not merely survive her lifetime, but continue to evolve, adapting to new challenges while maintaining its essential principles of continuity, discipline, and service. Mary's life was also defined by her approach to personal hardship and public scrutiny. She endured immense loss, both of family members and of the world she had known, while maintaining composure, discretion, and steadfastness. The deaths of her children, the abdication of Edward VIII, the ravages of war, and the transformations of society could have left her bitter, withdrawn, or disengaged. Instead, she applied her energy and intellect to the careful management of the royal household, the cultivation of public trust, and the preparation of her successors. Her personal suffering became a source of strength rather than a cause for retreat, exemplifying a model of leadership in which duty, service, and resilience were inseparable from the exercise of influence. This capacity to transform private grief into public fortitude is one of the hallmarks of her legacy and a testament to her enduring impact on the monarchy. Her understanding of symbolism and continuity extended to every facet of her role. Mary recognized that monarchy is not merely an office or an institution, but a narrative, a story told through ceremonies, appearances, decisions, and the comportment of those who embody it. She understood that the crown's legitimacy depended upon public perception, and that moral authority was cultivated through consistent, principled behavior rather than charisma or popularity. Her own life exemplified this principle. She was neither the most glamorous nor the most accessible royal, yet her steadfastness, reliability, and disciplined approach to duty created a framework within which the monarchy could operate effectively, survive crises, and maintain public trust. In this sense, Mary's power was invisible yet foundational, shaping the institution from within and ensuring its relevance in a rapidly changing world. Mary of Teck's influence persisted long after her death in 1953. She did not live to see much of Elizabeth II's reign, yet the lessons she imparted, the example she set, and the guidance she provided to both George VI and the young Elizabeth ensured that the monarchy entered a new era with stability, discipline, and moral authority. Her work in mentoring the next generation, reinforcing institutional resilience, and cultivating public trust created the conditions for the monarchy's survival and adaptation in a world increasingly characterized by social, political, and technological change. Her legacy is not measured in popularity, spectacle, or public adulation, but in the quiet strength, stability, and wisdom that she imparted to the crown itself.
Ultimately, Mary of Teck represents a form of royal power that is both rare and enduring, a power grounded in reliability, principle, and foresight. She survived 2 world wars, navigated the abdication crisis, and guided her family through periods of profound upheaval, all while maintaining the dignity, discipline, and moral authority necessary to sustain the monarchy. Her life demonstrates that influence is not always loud, visible, or immediate. It can be subtle, patient, and foundational, shaping institutions over decades and ensuring their survival long after individual actors have passed. Mary's contribution to the British monarchy is thus immeasurable. Through her steadfastness, her judgment, and her unwavering commitment to duty, she preserved the crown, guided its heirs, and helped shape it into the enduring institution the world recognizes today. In the final analysis, Mary of Teck's legacy lies not in spectacle or emotion, but in the unshakable reliability she brought to the crown. She was the backbone of the monarchy, the guardian of tradition tempered by careful evolution, and the quiet architect of stability during some of the most turbulent decades in modern history. Her life serves as a testament to the enduring power of discipline, foresight, and principled leadership, illustrating that the true measure of influence often resides not in public adoration, but in the steadfast maintenance of values, the preservation of institutions, and the cultivation of those who will carry the work forward. Mary's contribution ensured that the British monarchy not only survived the crises of her era, but emerged stronger, prepared, and poised to endure for generations to come.